I'm dead. This person has a birch.
Okay, we're streaming. You guys can proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone. I believe we have everybody here. Normally on a trial, we rise at certain times during the proceedings out of respect for the court and the jury, but in virtual trial, we will not be doing that. My name is Haley Hobron. I will be the presiding judge. You can refer to me as Judge Hobron or Your Honor. At this time, I would like to swear in all of the witnesses, so please turn on your video and raise your right hand. Do you promise that the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of the mock trial competition?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, Your Honor.
All right, I'm going to assume some of us might still have microphone muted, but that you all said yes. A few reminders on logistics. No communication is allowed between competing team members and others in the Zoom courtroom until the trial is concluded. Only people associated with the participating teams and officials associated with hosting are permitted in the Zoom courtroom. Make sure you're not wearing anything that could associate you to a school or team name, and make sure that nothing is in the background of your camera that could associate you similarly. Confirm the presence of the student timekeepers. The timekeepers will use the Zoom chat to show time signals. Confirm the presence of courtroom artists. Ask that they put their drawing pad up to the camera in order to confirm they are starting from a blank page. So I think that was meant as a direction, not for me to read, but if I don't know if we have any artists here today. Be sure all electronic devices are on silent mode, and please refrain from answering phone calls or text messages or using any electronic device during the course of the round. Is either team intending on recording? If the leads want to let me know now.
No.
We're not planning on it.
All right. All right, at this time, let's call the case of State of Texoma versus Silvestris Diardi. Scoring judges, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and turn off your audio and video. These should remain off until the trial ends. Everyone should also have video set to hide all non-video participants. This means the only people on the screen right now should be the advocates and me. Can the attorneys please make appearances for pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution has a few pretrial matters, but we maybe make our introductions before.
Yes, please make your introductions before we get to those matters.
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Claire Baxter, and I represent the state of Texoma.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Isabel St. John, and I represent the state of Texoma.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Liam Blank, and I represent the state of Texoma.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Maria Artaza, and I'll be portraying Serval Arata.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Abby Anderson, and I will be portraying Sandaleo.
Let's keep moving along with introductions.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Jacob Mitchell, and I will be representing my client, Silvestris Diardi.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Amy Hazelhorst, and I will be representing the defendant, Silvestris Diardi.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Manya Iron. I will be representing the defendant, Silvestris Diardi.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Sanvi Halapet, and I will be portraying Silvestris Diardi.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Mia Eli, and I'll be portraying Kit Manuel.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Abby Terry, and I'll be portraying Chaz Nehmeyer.
Okay. Did we miss one of the witnesses for the prosecution?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Avery Avila Dixon, and I will be portraying Pardalis Jacobidis.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution has a few housekeeping matters we would like to attend to.
So before we get to that, are there any changes to your team rosters and role assignments that are not reflected on the rosters that you sent us?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
No, Your Honor.
All right. We can get to pretrial matters now.
Your Honor, may we assume that all witnesses have been pre-sworn? Oh, you already sworn them, never mind.
Yes, ma'am.
And may we assume that all exhibits have been pre-marked?
Yes, ma'am.
And may we assume per mock trial competition rules that all the witnesses, the jury, and Your Honor have all the exhibits in hand and may refer to the exhibits when instructed?
You may.
And also per mock trial competition rules for this year, may we assume that exhibits are not permitted to be shared on screen?
Yes, ma'am.
And if we have an objection and need to approach the bench, may we constructively do so?
You may. If you need to approach me, I would just say raise your hand. I guess you're talking about like in the case of an objection or something that you guys have all done around now. So you've seen kind of how we've rolled this out. Let's just proceed with how we've been doing it in the previous rounds and we'll get through it.
Yes, Your Honor. And per stipulation 6, the prosecution wants to call the court's attention to the fact that the knowledge of the will's beneficiaries is undisputed.
Does the defense have an opinion on that?
The defense holds no objections, Your Honor.
All right, then we can do that. That's fine.
The prosecution has no more pretrial matters, Your Honor, and the prosecution is ready for trial.
Okay. So, before opening statements, everyone should make sure they are in speaker view. The button is in the upper right of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. And also for my part, just do not forget that you lose points if you read from your script. So I saw it a lot in the last round. A lot of teams lost points. We can tell if you're reading off your screen versus if you're just talking to us. So we understand if you need to refer to notes periodically, but please do your very best to not get distracted by anything you have pulled up on your screen because that will affect your score. Particularly for me as a presiding judge, my ballot might not be counted, but I do take score throughout the process just in case one of the other ballots are not used so that you guys can have a score. So please remember that as we move forward. At this time, we are ready for opening statements and you may begin prosecution.
Yes, Your Honor. I'm just waiting for the rest of the viewers to leave the screen. Permission to proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, I'm waiting on you.
May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. We are here in court today because Barry Bazaar, the owner of the Big Cat Sanctuary, has been missing since April 30th, 2020, and is now presumed dead. Sylvester Stiardi, the defendant and a supervisor at the sanctuary, was alone that night with Barry Bazaar, her boss. The defendant, the sole beneficiary of Barry Bazaar's will, stood to gain everything by her boss's death. However, worried that Mr. Bazaar would change his will, the defendant decided to take matters into her own hands and fed Mr. Bazaar to the very cat he loved most, the Y-Cat. The evidence will show that to cover up her crime, she sailed out to sea with Barry's body on his boat, left the boat to continue its course alone, and then swam back to the marina. Unbelievable? Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Members of the jury, my name is Liam Blank, and along with my co-counsels Claire Baxter and Isabel St. John, we represent the state of Texoma in this case. As the prosecution, we gladly bear the burden of proof. This means that we have to prove to you that Sylvester Stiardi is guilty of murder. We must prove that she intentionally or knowingly caused the death of Barry Bazaar without justification. And we must prove this to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt simply means that you must find the proof we have presented to be proof of such a convincing character that a reasonable person would not hesitate to rely and act upon it. We will call 3 witnesses to prove our case to you. First, you will hear from Serval Alrata, Mr. Bazaar's personal assistant. She will tell you that having worked together for 6 years, she and Mr. Bazaar were like family. In contrast, she will tell you that there was tension between the defendant and Mr. Bazar. She will also tell you that on April 30th, 2020, the night Mr. Bazar disappeared, the defendant intentionally sent all the employees of the sanctuary away on errands, leaving the defendant alone with Mr. Bazar that night. Ms. Alrada will testify that she did not return to the sanctuary until 11 p.m. And when she returned, she saw the defendant suspiciously soaking wet. Next, you will hear from Ms. Pardalis Jacobidis, a filmmaker making a documentary about the sanctuary. She will tell you that the defendant regularly criticized her boss, Mr. Bazar. She will also tell you how she kept all the footage for her documentary in her shed, including incriminating footage about the defendant. However, she will also tell you that a suspicious fire broke out in her shed, destroying the incriminating evidence along with everything else. Lastly, you will hear from Detective Sunda Leo, the lead investigator in this case. She will tell you about her investigation of the fire and Mr. Bazar's disappearance. She will tell you about the evidence that the forensics team found and how this evidence incriminates the defendant. She will also confirm that Ms. Diardi has no alibi for the night of April 30th and was alone with Mr. Bazar on that night. She will testify that after a thorough investigation and a review of the evidence, she charged the defendant with the murder of Mr. Bazar. Now, the defense may say that because there is no body, there has been no crime. But the evidence will show that there is no body because the defendant covered up her crime. And the way she covered it up makes the truth in this case stranger than any fiction you might have read. Members of the jury, the prosecution bears the burden of proof in this case, but we are confident that after reviewing the evidence we present, you will find beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of murder. Thank you.
The defense may produce their opening.
My name is Manya Iyer, and I'm representing the defendant, Sylvestris or Sylvie Diardi. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is simply about a missing person. At best, it's unclear for what the reason Barry Bazar going missing is in the first place. Even the prosecution admits that there was no body found. The defendant stands here falsely accused of murder, a very serious crime. The prosecution has the burden of proving that Ms. Diardi is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but the only thing on their side is circumstantial or not solid evidence. They are grasping at straws to build their case, and just like the straw house in the fairy tale, a huff and a puff and their house will fall down. At the end of the case, we ask for a verdict of not guilty, and we are going to prove why the defendant deserves that. The defense will call 3 witnesses to the stand. The first witness we will call, Kip Manul, is the maintenance and repair technician at the sanctuary. She will testify to what her view of the relationship between the defendant and Barry qualifies as, to someone without direct emotional ties to either of them. She will then testify to her interpretation of the events on the night that Barry went missing, providing an alibi for not only herself, but also Ms. Diardi. The second, Sylvestris Diardi, the defendant, will testify to her paternal-like bond with Barry Bazar. She will explain how her recruitment to the sanctuary helped with her reformation and a chance at life as an ex-convict, how Barry's policy of only hiring ex-convicts made her feel less alone, and how their relationship was so close that she was even made the primary beneficiary to Barry's will. She will then testify to her relationships with her coworkers and overall life at the sanctuary. Lastly, she will run through the day that Barry went missing and her lack of involvement that night. Shaus Samir, better known as Marine, is the last witness we will call. She's an ex-Marine and works and lives at the Texoma Marina. She will explain how she knows the victim and then testify to her knowledge of boats, specifically Barry's. Marine will then describe the events of April 30th, the night Barry went missing, in detail, touching on issues with the victim's boat and the trajectory of the typhoon. The prosecution will bring up things that make Ms. Diardi sound guilty, things that are grossly twisted to fit their story. They will use their witnesses, one of whom had motive against Mr. Bazar, another who is a detective, barely qualified for this case, and the last that is a journalist with a flair for drama in order to produce her documentary. They will do this to paint my client as something she is not. Why? because the only evidence they have on their side is circumstantial at best. Straws that won't hold up a house. As I said earlier, a small huff here and a little puff there in their case is nothing but a pile of straw. The chances of the prosecution coming up with something legitimately incriminating are the same as pulling a needle from a haystack. There is nothing solid pointing to Ms. Giardi as being guilty. Thus, at the conclusion of this case, we ask that you find my client innocent and issue a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
All right. Before the state calls its first witness, I ask everyone to switch to gallery view. If you want, that button is in the upper right of your screen, and it'll allow you to see the attorneys and witnesses at the same time. All right, prosecution, are you ready to proceed with your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Servo Lorata to the stand.
You may proceed.
Your Honor, should I wait for opposing counsel or proceed?
Do they have their video up?
Yes, Your Honor. They just put it up. Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes, I'd be more than happy to. Howdy, my name is Servo Lorata and I'm 28 years old.
And what do you do for a living, Miss Lorata?
I work at the Big Cat Sanctuary as the personal assistant to Barry Bazaar.
Who was Barry Bazaar?
He was the owner of the Big Cat Sanctuary.
What is this Big Cat Sanctuary?
Oh, it's quite wonderful. In fact, it's like a zoo where parents can bring their children to learn and see the cats.
And how did you get this job?
Well, I used to work at my parents' vet clinic. Both of my parents were vets. And Barry came in one day and we started chatting, and boom, the next thing you know, I was offered a job.
And Miss Lorata, how long had you worked for Mr. Bazaar?
For about 6 years now.
So let's talk a little bit about your job. What were some of your responsibilities?
My job was amazing, but besides being Barry's personal assistant, I kept track of his records and his schedule and maintained tasks for our front of house operations.
Now, Miss Lorata, did you ever work with any of the animals or machines at the sanctuary?
Oh, no, never. I was just a paper pusher.
So who else worked at the sanctuary with you?
Sylvester Giardi and Kit Manuel.
And what was the defendant's, Miss Giardi's, job at the sanctuary?
Sylvester, she was in charge of taking care of the cats, which included feeding them and then maintaining supplies for the sanctuary.
And what was Miss Manuel's job?
Okay, she had odd jobs like repairing equipment, such as the knives and the meat grinders, and cleaning out the cats' cages. And every once in a while, when she had too much on her plate, Sylvester and I would give her a hand with the cleaning of the cages.
Now, Miss Lorata, did y'all all commute to the sanctuary?
No, because we all lived on site.
So besides you, Barry Bazaar, the defendant, and Miss Manuel, did anyone else live at the sanctuary?
Yes, about a year ago, a filmmaker named Pardalis Jacobidis moved and lives in the shed.
And Miss Lorata, do you know why Miss Jacobidis decided to move in?
Yes, she was.
Calls for speculation.
Response, Your Honor. I'm just asking Miss Lorata to testify to her personal knowledge. She might know or she might not know why Miss Jacobidis decided to move in, and her answer will give that personal information that she has. She's just testifying to the knowledge that she personally has.
Overruled.
Miss Lorata, do you know why Miss Jacobidis decided to move in?
Yes, she was filming a documentary and wanted to portray Barry's love and charisma towards the cats, and thought it would be appropriate to be on site at all times to capture everything.
And Miss Lorata, why are you here in court today?
Well, I'm here in court today because my boss, Barry Bazaar, disappeared on April 30th, 2020. And I'm afraid something so terrible has happened to him, like he's been murdered. And I'm here to testify as to what I know regarding his disappearance.
Miss Lorata, where did
witness's answer lacks foundation?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you. You might need to get closer to your mic.
Sorry, objection, witness's answer.
Oh, yeah, it's the headphones. I don't know if that's going to work. Your mic piece is coming out way in front of your face so that it's not picking up. Yeah, try it again.
Is this better?
Yeah, with it hanging down so that it's catching it so you're not touching it with your hands. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Objection, witness's answer lacks foundation.
Response, Your Honor.
Sure.
I think it is fairly well established that Giardi is on in trial today for a charge of murder. Ms. Serrata was here for the opening statements, and she just believes that that is what happened to her boss, Mr. Bizarre. She's not saying that he was or was not murdered, but she is just testifying to things she has heard, and she can testify to her rationally based perception as we are here in court today for a murder charge.
I'm going to sustain it. I don't see any harm with you asking one or two more questions to set up your foundation, if you think you can accomplish that, and then we'll see again if she wants to make another objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Serrata, have you seen Mr. Bizarre recently?
No, I have not.
In fact, where did you last see Mr. Bizarre?
At the sanctuary.
And do you have any specific recollections from that last day, April the 30th?
Oh, yes. I remember that day vividly. It was a very strange day.
How so?
Well, the morning started off by me being instructed by Sylvestris that we would have to make some trips that day, but these trips were very unusual.
What did the defendant tell you to do?
Well, Sylvestris instructed me that I needed to buy some video cameras from the Weiss Spime store, but the one in Melissa.
Why was that so unusual?
Because it was so far away. We had a closer Weiss Spime, but Sylvestris wanted me to go to the farther one.
Did the defendant give any other instructions that evening?
Yes, she instructed Kit Manuel to embark on a 3-hour ride, ridiculous, to a meat plant to buy some more meat for the cats.
And Ms. Serrata, why was that so unusual?
Well, because we had a meat plant that was much closer.
Your Honor, permission to instruct the witness to what has been previously marked as Exhibit 7.
Granted.
Ms. Serrata, do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes, ma'am. It's the feeding log for all the cats.
And you use this feeding log in your job?
Oh, yes, we use it regularly as part of the sanctuary business.
And where do you keep these notes?
I keep them in a file in my office.
So what does Exhibit 7 describe?
It describes when the cats were fed and which cats were fed.
And is it a true and correct copy of this log?
Yes, ma'am.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
I do not believe so.
And was the log made at or near the time of the feeding of the big cats at the Big Cat Sanctuary?
Yes.
And was it kept in the regular course of business at the Big Cat Sanctuary?
Yes, it was.
And was making it a regular practice of business?
Absolutely.
And are you a custodian of this log?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
And lastly, is this information trustworthy?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state offers Exhibit 7 into evidence as a business record under Rule 8036.
Defense, any objections?
No, Your Honor.
Your Honor, may I publish Exhibit 7 to the jury so they may follow along?
You may.
Ms. Serrata, can you please read who was fed at 4:30 p.m. on April the 27th?
Yes, ma'am. 4:30 p.m. Fed all cats except White Cat, who is in one of her moods again. We'll try again in an hour.
Now, can you please read who was fed at 8:45 a.m. on April the 28th?
Of course. 8:45 a.m. Fed all cats except White Cat and Isabel. Again, not enough meat has been processed. To discuss with Barry.
Lastly, can you read who was fed at 9:15 a.m. on April the 30th?
Absolutely. 9:15 a.m. Not enough meat to feed all big cats. Visiting meat plant this evening to stock back up. Fed youngest big cats in the northernmost cages.
So, Ms. Serrata, in reviewing these feeding log notes, about how many times had White Cat been fed in a span of 4 whole days?
White Cat had only been fed once in the span of 4 days.
And Ms. Serrata, do you know why Ms. Manuel had to go get meat?
Yes, because we were low on meat and the cats were hungry.
And who is the one in charge of feeding the cats?
Sylvestris Diardi was, and according to the feeding notes, it looked like she was starving White Cat.
Now, Ms. Serrata, do you know when Ms. Manuel left for the plant?
Yes, Kip left to go on her 3-hour journey, bless her heart, after our all-employee dinner at 6:30 p.m.
And when did you leave?
I left at 7:30 p.m.
And Ms. Serrata, do you know if Ms. Jacobidis was still at the sanctuary at this point?
Yes, Jacobidis was not there because it was a Thursday night, and every Thursday night for the past year, her and her crew would go out into town.
So, Ms. Serrata, to your personal knowledge, who all was at the sanctuary at that time?
To my personal knowledge, it was just Sylvestris and Barry who were left.
And at this point, where were you?
I was at the Weiss Spime store, but not the one in Melissa.
Did they have the stuff you needed?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they did. So I'm confused as to why Sylvestris would lie to me about something like that.
Objection, speculative.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
Ms. Arata was told by Diardi that the cameras were not there. She was told one thing and the exact opposite was actually the reality. She was told they weren't there. She went to the store and the cameras that she needed ended up being there, even though she was told otherwise.
Yeah, you're making a presupposition that she was lying and not mistaken, though. So the objection is sustained. Continue.
And what did you do after you had gotten these cameras?
Well, it had been a long day, so I went to Snoopy's pub to have a drink or two.
And how long would you say you stayed there?
I was there for about an hour and a half until 10:45 p.m. because it was only a 15-minute drive from the sanctuary.
So what time did you get back to the sanctuary?
At 11 p.m.
And did you notice anything unusual when you arrived late that evening?
Yes, I noticed that White Cat's cage had been cleaned and it reeked of bleach.
And why was that so unusual?
Because none of the other cages had been cleaned. White Cat's cage was the only one.
Do you know when the cage had been cleaned?
Yes, I know that it had to have been cleaned sometime after I left and before I got back.
So did you notice anything else unusual that night?
Yes, I noticed that Barry's boat was missing from the dock.
And did anything happen after you noticed this?
Yes, I saw Sylvestris walk in from the marina back to the sanctuary.
What did you observe about the defendant at this time?
Well, she was soaking wet, drenched as a matter of fact, covered from head to toe.
And just to clarify, about what time is it at this point?
It was midnight.
So, Ms. Arata, did you see Barry Bazaar the next day, May the 1st?
No, I did not.
And did you see Barry Bazaar the following day, May the 2nd?
No, and I started to get worried that something so terribly wrong had happened to him.
So, if you were worried, did you call the police?
No.
Why not?
Well, you see, I wanted to call the police and I talked about it with Sylvestris and she didn't want to. And since Sylvestris is the boss, I didn't want to upset her.
Now, Mr. Arata, I'd like to talk a little bit about the big cats at the sanctuary. What was Mr. Bazaar's relationship like with the cats?
Oh, he had a great relationship with all of the cats, especially with White Cat. It was very special.
And do you know if any of the cats had ever attacked him?
Yes, about a year ago, one of the cats attacked Barry.
Your Honor, permission to direct the witness's attention to Exhibit 8.
Go for it.
Mr. Arata, do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes, ma'am. It's a newspaper article from the Texoma Free Press.
And did you read this article?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Is it a true and correct copy of the article?
I believe so.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, ma'am.
Your Honor, Exhibit 8 is stipulated as admissible and the prosecution offers it into evidence.
So admitted.
And Your Honor, may I publish to the jury at this time?
You may.
Mr. Arata, can you please read the quote at the bottom from Mr. Kurtz?
Yes, ma'am. Snow leopards are beautiful to watch and observe, but they are dangerous animals that can kill a human in seconds, even if unprovoked.
So, Mr. Arata, do you believe that Mr. Bazaar could have been killed in that cat attack a year ago?
Yes, I do.
Cause for speculation.
Response, Your Honor. This is not speculation. Ms. Arata can use her rationally based perception. She can make the jump that these are dangerous wild animals that have the potential to attack and potentially kill a person. And Barry Bazaar was attacked by a cat. So there is that link of a potential killing because it was the cat that had attacked him. He obviously was not severely attacked, but that could have happened. It is a potential possibility.
Are you presenting her as an expert?
No, Your Honor, but she does live at the sanctuary. She lives with these cats day in and day out, and I do not think it is any stretch for her to say that these cats could kill somebody. It's within her rationally based perception as she lives with these cats and works with them every single day and knows their habits and behaviors.
Defense, what's your response?
Your Honor, as stated already, this witness is not an expert witness. They don't know the full potential of the cats. They have no way of knowing if this cat was truly has the potential to kill the defendant. I mean, sorry.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
Ms. Arata can also testify to her personal knowledge. She just read from an article that describes that these snow cats are in fact dangerous, or snow leopards are in fact dangerous wild animals that can kill a human being. these snow leopards are very, very similar to the cats that were at the sanctuary. And Ms. Arata knows this because she has the personal knowledge of working with these cats day in and day out.
I'm going to sustain the objection unless you want to set the predicate for setting her up as an expert in
Yes,
this
Your Honor.
matter. Continue.
Now, Mr. Arata, do you know who the beneficiary of Barry Bazaar's will is?
Yes, ma'am. Right now it's Sylvester Stiardi.
And were you ever the beneficiary?
Yes, I was until about a year ago.
And had you observed any tensions between Mr. Bazaar and the defendant before Mr. Bazaar mysteriously disappeared?
Yes, about 2 weeks prior to Barry's disappearance, I observed several loud arguments between Barry and Sylvester.
And Mr. Arata, what did you observe about Mr. Bazaar's demeanor toward the defendant in these arguments?
Well, when Barry found out what Sylvester was feeding the cats, he went livid. He was through the roof and threatened to remove Sylvester as the primary beneficiary.
Objection, hearsay.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
This is an exception to hearsay under Rule 803.3 because it goes to Barry Bazaar's then existing mental condition. Mr. Arata just testified that it was in the moment that Barry Bazaar found out that what the cats were being fed, that he threatened to remove the defendant from the will. It wasn't any kind of premeditated thought that Barry had about removing the defendant from the will. It was in that exact moment when he was livid from the news he had just heard as his then existing mental condition that made him go from being livid to jumping to saying he wanted to potentially remove the defendant from the will.
So are you trying to prove that he was going to remove the defendant from the will, or are you trying to prove that Barry was mad? Because whether or not I sustain and overrule this objection depends on what you're trying to get at here.
Yes, Your Honor, I'm saying that because Mr. Bazaar was in a livid mind state, his then existing mental condition, that is what made him respond in this way, saying that the defendant had the potential to be taken out of the will.
Right, but I'm going to sustain the objection. You're trying to get to the point where let's sustain the objection and move on.
Now, without testifying to what Mr. Bazaar said, Mr. Arata, what did you observe about Mr. Bazaar's demeanor?
That he was upset and angry.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
All right, defense?
Are you open for cross?
Yes, please proceed with your cross-examination.
Sorry.
Before you begin, do you need the headphones in order to access your microphone, or do you have an internal mic on your computer you can use?
I should have an internal mic.
Would you mind just testing to see if you can hear okay and if the microphone works better without the headphones? Just to make you a little clearer on par with everybody else.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's a little bit better on our end. Can you still hear on your speakers?
Oh. Okay. I'm so sorry. Could you say something so I'm sure I have enough, like I can hear you?
Oh, that's okay. Can you still hear on your speakers? I just didn't know if you needed the headphones in order to for accessibility, but if this is much better, if this is okay for you.
Okay.
Go ahead and proceed.
Okay, good afternoon, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm Amy Hayesforce, and I'm representing the defendant, Sasha Stiardi, in today's case. So about a year ago, Sylvester saved Barry in an attack by one of the big cats at the sanctuary. Is that correct?
Wait, hold on. We're looking at cross-examination here.
Yes.
Yes, so you're providing a narrative. If you want to ask questions for the witness, we can proceed with that.
Okay. Can I ask, is it correct that Sylvester saved Barry in an attack by one of the big cats at the sanctuary a year ago?
Yes, he did, or she did.
Following that incident, it's right that Barry changed his will to name Sylvester as the primary beneficiary.
That's correct.
Is it true that before Barry decided to make that change, you were the primary beneficiary?
Yes, ma'am.
So in your testimony, you say that this change shocked you and left you confused and upset. Is that correct?
Yes, initially.
Objection, non-responsive. A yes or no answer will do.
Yes, ma'am. I was upset at first. I was just confused why Barry would make such a hasty change without talking to me first.
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive. Motion to strike everything after the word yes.
That's sustained. If somebody makes an objection, wait for us to deal with the objection before you continue forward. I know the instinct is to keep going. Happens in the real world too, but let's just wait for everyone to be able to respond. Do you have a response to the objection? I mean, this is pretty simple. If she wants you to stick to yes or no, let's do our best to stay within the parameters. Sustained.
Okay.
Continue.
You state in your testimony that Barry and you were family, correct?
Yes.
You go on to say that who does something like that to his family, correct?
Yes, I was upset at first.
Objection, Your Honor, a yes or no answer will do. Non-responsive, a yes or no answer will do.
Your Honor, I would argue that my witness is well within the bounds of the question.
I'm going to sustain it, but I do think she's answering your question. And I don't want to get bogged down in getting an objection for non-responsive every time if she is actually attempting to answer you succinctly. So let's move forward.
Is it right that you are not officially accused of murdering or planning to murder Barry?
I don't understand your question. Do you mind rephrasing it, please?
Right, so you're not the one officially accused of planning to murder Barry, correct?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Yet in your testimony, you still have to defend yourself by stating you certainly didn't kill Barry over that change or concoct some scheme to do so, correct?
I'm not understanding still.
In your testimony, you defend yourself directly by stating you certainly didn't kill Barry over that change and concoct some scheme to do so, correct?
I never killed Barry, if that's what you're asking.
But you do state in your testimony in an attempt to defend yourself that you certainly didn't kill Barry over the change or concoct some scheme to do so.
Objection, Your Honor. My witness never testified to that in her direct examination.
Response, defense. Counsel, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, defense counsel, can you hear me? Is she frozen?
Oh,
Judge, I think she was frozen, but she looks like she's back now.
blue.
Yeah, defense counsel, do you want to respond?
Sure. So this quote is taken directly from the witness's testimony. This is just establishing that though they are not accused, they still need to defend themselves in their testimony.
You mean that you're taking it from the packet testimony?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is it in the form of a deposition?
No.
The witness statement? If so, I'm gonna sustain the objection that testimony has not been presented yet here in this hearing by the witness. She hasn't presented that on direct. So if you do want to present past statements from any of the witnesses, you can lay the foundation for referring them to those prior statements, but you will need to do the predicate and lay the foundation for introducing that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Your Honor. May I proceed with the questioning?
Yes.
Okay. Is it true that after the will change, you were second in line?
Yes, ma'am.
And you are aware that if the defendant is to become unable to inherit the estate for any reason, such as a federal conviction for murder, you would inherit the estate. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. That's what I've heard.
Okay. In your testimony, you bring up that Sylvester had been feeding cheap rancid meat to the cats. Is that right?
Yes, she had been.
You say that this angered Barry, correct?
Yes, and I can see why, because giving cats bad meat can make them sick. It cause a number of things.
Okay. Yet later, when Sylvester wanted to purchase more cheap meat, you admit that, as stated in your testimony, Barry seemed to be on board with it, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, Ms. Arata never testified to this.
Yeah, again, we're not using witness statements from the packets unless you set the predicate and introduce it as a prior testimony in order to impeach or introduce it. So if you want to set the foundation for that testimony that you're referring to, I would go ahead and do it now, but otherwise I'm going to sustain the objection and let's stick within the parameters of what's on the record here.
Okay. So as shown in the feeding notes, you say Sylvester had been neglecting to feed YCAT properly. Is that true?
Yes, in the feeding notes, it specifies that YCAT had only been fed once in a span of 4 days.
It took time before you noticed that this was occurring, correct?
Oh, do you mind repeating the question, please?
It took time before you noticed that this was occurring, correct?
It took a day or two.
Okay. Well, it is your job to keep track of the feeding notes. Is that right?
Yes, but Sylvestris is the one who writes them. I just make copies of the feeding notes and keep them in a file in my office.
Okay. On the evening of April 30th, the day Barry disappeared, you were sent to the Wiesbaum store to buy some new video cameras. Is that true?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been marked for identification purposes as exhibit number 6?
Yes, you may.
Could you please identify this exhibit?
In my testimony and on my direct, we did not admit exhibit 6, only 7 and 8.
Wait, is that prosecution? Is that correct? Is this not a stipulated piece of evidence?
Well, Your Honor, is she trying to admit it right now? I thought that's what she was attempting to do.
Yes, I'm trying to admit a new piece of evidence.
Right. That is my understanding as well. You still need to lay to the foundation. Okay. Yeah, she can proceed. She's just showing it to you so she can lay the foundation. So carry forward.
Could you please identify this exhibit?
Yes, ma'am. It's my receipt from when I went to the Wiesbaum store.
And it's an exact copy of the receipt from your purchase the night of April 30th.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Say everything listed on the receipt is correct, all in order?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Your Honor, we offer exhibit number 6 into evidence.
Prosecution, any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. It is so admitted. You may proceed.
The last thing listed that you purchased is lithium smoke detector batteries. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay. Your Honor, may I publish this exhibit to the jury?
Yes, you may.
Is it true that purchasing these batteries was not a part of what was assigned to you that day?
Yes.
Nor is it something your job would regularly require you to do, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I was just wanting to help out around the sanctuary and take the weight off of someone else's shoulders.
So Sylvestris had sent you to the wrong Wiesbaum store that day, which upset you, correct?
She sent me to the one in Melissa, but we had a closer one.
Yes, and that upset you, correct?
I was a little annoyed that I had to go so far away because it was an hour and a half and our local one was only 45 minutes away.
As a result of that, you claim to have gone to Snoopy's pub around 9 p.m. for some alone time. Is that true?
Yes, it had been a long day and I needed a drink or two.
Okay. You paid in cash at the pub. Is that true?
Yes, ma'am.
So there's no receipt from your time there, correct?
No, there's not.
At around 9:30 p.m., Sylvestris texted to let you know they were going out on a run. Is that true?
Yes.
So you knew they would not be at the sanctuary at that time. Is that right?
I knew that Sylvestris was going on a run.
Okay. So it's true that Sylvestris would go running very regularly, correct?
Yes.
So it would be correct to assume that this was not very strange.
Yes. Well, I thought it was strange because it was so late at night.
You claim that when you arrived at the sanctuary, the white cat's cage appeared to be freshly cleaned, correct?
Oh, yes. You could smell the bleach.
Cleaning the cat's cages was a part of Kip Manul's job. That's true, right?
Yes.
You would occasionally help clean the cages as well. Is that right?
Yes, whenever Kip had too much work.
Right. Before Barry disappeared, he had left on his boat a few times previously without telling anyone. Is that right?
Yes.
You knew how to drive Barry's boat and you had done it before, correct?
A little bit, but I was definitely not an expert.
When Barry and his boat still hadn't returned May 2nd, Sylvestris wanted to call the Coast Guard, correct?
Yes.
Yet you wanted to call the police directly. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
On May 3rd, when you were telling Detective Leo about how the white cat cage appeared the night of April 30th, you noted it was way too clean, correct?
Yes, I thought it was odd because White Cat's cage was the only cage that had been cleaned. All the others were still dirty.
Right. You also state that when Sylvester was in charge of cleaning the cages before Kip, he would clean them so poorly they had to be redone. Is that true?
Yes.
Now, when Jacobus, the filmmaker, first came to the sanctuary, you felt a bit iffy about the prospect. Is that right?
Yes, I cared about Barry deeply, and I just wanted to make sure that no one was abusing his kindness.
Over time, you worried that Jacobus was making Barry look too eccentric, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. The fact that Jacobus was trying to paint Barry Bizarre in a certain way does not make it more or less probable that Diardi was the one who killed Barry Bizarre, so I don't think this is relevant.
Okay, so your objection is on relevance?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, response?
Your Honor, this is relevant because the night of May 2nd, there was a fire in the shed of Jacobus, which is part of what the prosecution believes makes Sylvester look incriminating. However, this is the fact that Jacobus is bothersome and Serval is worried about him making Barry look painting Barry in a bad light. Provides a different motive for possibly the setting of the fire of the shed and a suspect that may have been overlooked.
Okay, I'm gonna overrule the objection based on relevance, but I would rephrase the question.
Okay. So you were worried about the way that Jacobus was painting Barry in his documentary. Would that be correct?
Yes, I was at the beginning because I didn't really know Pardalis Jacobus well.
So on the night of May 2nd, a fire broke out in Jacobus's shed and the fire alarms did not go off. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
You were the first one to purchase the alarms. Is that true?
Yes, originally, but that had been years ago.
You are aware that the alarms do not beep if the batteries are dead or if there are no batteries, correct?
They would beep if the batteries were dead, but like if the alarm system was broken, there would be no sound at all.
You claim that the reason you never upgraded the alarms was because you were never instructed to. Would you agree?
Yes.
But on the night of April 30th, you were never instructed to purchase new alarm batteries, and you did that anyways, correct?
Yes, because I knew that the batteries were out, and so I was like, oh, like if I'm going out anyways, I might as well just pick them up.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. If the prosecution doesn't want to, do you want an opportunity for redirect?
No redirect necessary, Your Honor. I'd ask that my witness be able to step down.
The witness may step down. Let's keep this moving though. We're burning a lot of time, guys. Witness 2, let's go ahead.
Your Honor, the state calls Pardalis Jacobus to the stand.
Okay.
Would you please introduce yourself to the court? Good morning. My name is Pardalis Jacobus, but a lot of people call me PJ. And what do you do for a living, Miss Jacobus? Well, I'm a freelance journalist, but I specialize in documentaries about unique individuals and businesses. And how long have you been a journalist? For 10 years. What kind of documentaries have you done? Oh, everything. I mean, once I did a whole community that lived in sewers, but really just the most wild and strange stories. And are you working on anything right now? Well, yes, ma'am. My latest was an in-depth look at the Barry Bizarre, the creator and owner of the Big Cat Temple. What was this documentary about? Well, primarily it was about, life in the sanctuary, focusing on Barry, looking at the cats, and employee interactions. When did you start filming the documentary? Spring of last year when I moved to the sanctuary to do the filming. Now, let's talk about your documentary. Who all did you interview? Well, of course, Barry Bizarre, the owner of the Big Cat Temple. And what did you observe about Barry Bizarre? Well, he was a total enigma and a bit eccentric. And who else did you interview? Well, I interviewed all of the employees, Kip Manul, the handyman, Serval Rada, Barry's longtime assistant, but I focused on one employee in particular, Sylvester Diardi. And why did you focus on Sylvester Diardi? Well, she was by far the most interesting employee at the sanctuary, after Very Bizarre, of course. She was in charge of maintaining all of the supplies and equipment, feeding the cats, along with supervising and overseeing all of Barry's staff.
What did you observe about the defendant, Sylvester Stiardi?
Well, she seemed fine about her job, but painfully broke from her gambling habit. I mean, I do not know how she could survive on a measly $500 per week that Barry paid her.
And what made her interesting to interview?
Well, she would just say the craziest things. And the more time I spent with her, I mean, the better the dialogue got.
What do you mean by that?
Well, she said all sorts of critical things.
Objection, hearsay.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
This is not hearsay because my witness is not testifying to a specific fact, only that the defendant has said critical things, which is not hearsay because there's no statement being asserted.
Response?
The defense has no response, Your Honor.
Now, when was the, sorry.
Hold on, I haven't ruled yet. So I'm going to sustain the objection. There is an exception, but that was not the right one. So if you can figure out how to do it, you can proceed on that vein, and I will overrule his objection, but not as it stands.
Yes, Your Honor. I do also have an exception to hearsay under Rule 801 D2, admission by party opponent.
There we go. Yep, overruled. Moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Now, when was the last time that you saw Mr. Bizarre?
On April 30th.
Let's talk about the day Mr. Bizarre disappeared. What happened on the morning of April 30th?
Well, Serval sent everyone at the sanctuary off on various errands.
And were you at the sanctuary all day?
Well, I was there for most of the day, but I left around 7:30 to go get drinks and dinner with my crew, like I do every Thursday. I got back around 1 a.m.
And when you got back, did you notice anything out of the ordinary?
Well, no, I didn't.
And did you notice anything the next day on May 1st?
Yes, I noticed two things. The first being that the Y-Cat cage was freshly cleaned and smelled like bleach.
And what was the second thing?
Well, Barry Bizarre and his boat were gone.
And did you see Mr. Bizarre on May 1st?
No, ma'am.
Did you see Mr. Bizarre the next day, May 2nd?
No, ma'am.
And at this point, were you at all concerned about Barry Bizarre?
Yes, ma'am, certainly. Particularly when I remembered something that Sylvester Stiardi had said to me.
And what had the defendant said to you?
Wouldn't it be perfect karma if Barry was eaten by the Y-Cat?
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
This is an exception to hearsay under Rule 801 D2, admission by party opponent.
Overruled.
Thank you. Did anything else happen on May 2nd?
Yes, ma'am. A raging fire broke out in my shed, nearly killed me.
And what happened after the fire broke out?
Well, the fire department arrived later that night to put it out, but it was too late and all my footage was completely destroyed.
And do you have any idea how the fire started?
Well, no, but it was certainly suspicious to me.
And why were you suspicious about it?
Well, just the day before, I'd planned to take the footage that I'd shot of Sylvester Stiardi to the police if Barry Bizarre didn't show up.
And what was this footage?
It was the recording of Sylvester Stiardi saying, "Wouldn't it be perfect karma if Barry was eaten by the Y-Cat?"
And do you still have this footage?
No, ma'am. Unfortunately, it was destroyed in the fire along with all of my other footage.
Ms. Jacobus, why are you testifying in court today?
Because I'm suspicious of Sylvester Stiardi's, involvement in the disappearance of Barry Bizarre.
And do you have any idea if anyone was arrested in connection with Bizarre's disappearance?
Yes, ma'am. I know that Sylvester Stiardi was arrested and charged with murder on May 20th, 2020.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Defense counsel may proceed.
Apologies, Your Honor. I'm making sure that I can see the time. Good afternoon, Ms. Jacobidis. My name is Jacob Mitchell. I'm here representing the defendant. Glad to meet you. In August of 2019, are you aware that there was a reported attack from the new tiger at the cat sanctuary?
Yes, I heard the story about that.
And are you aware that you saw Sylvestris and Barry after that with significant cuts and scrapes on them?
I'm not sure I quite recall.
Were you aware that after that cat attack that Bizarre had ended up changing his will to the beneficiary of the will to Sylvestris?
Yeah, I think I heard something about that from one of the people at the sanctuary.
And you testified, or apologies, and were you aware of any tension that you saw as you were filming between Sylvestris and Serval?
Well, I'd say that Sylvestris, Serval seemed to maybe there seemed to be a little bit of tension between them. Honestly, all of the cast kind of had some interesting relations kind of with each other and the way that they'd interacted. It was really fascinating to film, I say. And
in your in the direct examination, you testified to a quote that allegedly Diardi stated. Could you repeat that for us today?
Yes. Wouldn't it be perfect karma if Barry was eaten by the Ycat?
Was there any more of that quote that you recall?
Yes. I believe later he wanted to say it's perfect revenge for being rebranded as some reincarnated dead lady.
And you claim to remember this word for word, correct?
Pretty much, yes. I assume I do. It was a shocking statement.
Yet in your testimony, you claimed the quote you told Detective Leo on May 5th contained the word response in place of revenge. Isn't that right?
I assume so. I mean, it was a long time ago. I'd almost died in a fire. I'm not quite sure I recall.
So, and then again in your addendum, you say...
Objection on the last question. My witness did not testify to that in her fact statement.
Answer.
The witness did testify to the quote in their fact statement, and the wording was different. I can pull up the line number if you would like me to.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I meant to say that she did not testify to this in her testimony today.
In her testimony, as far as right now testimony, right? Are you, the defense counsel, are you referencing something that she said in her prior testimony?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay, do you want to set the foundation for introducing her prior testimony in order to impeach her, or to just introduce that as an exhibit so we can consider it? I'm going to sustain the objection that she has not said that yet, but if you want to introduce her witness statement to her and set the predicate, then you can continue with that line of questioning based on what's in the competition packet.
I'll move on from that.
Okay.
So on April 30th, you claimed, or you were having breakfast with the employees at the sanctuary, is that right?
Yes, I was. That was when Sylvestris sent everyone away for the day on their jobs.
And did you know any tension between Sylvestris and Serval then?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Do you have a response?
Your Honor, this is merely establishing the witness's perception. It is not establishing whether or not there was indeed tension. It is not stating for the truth of the matter asserted, but simply Jacobitis' perception of tension being held between the two of Serval and Sylvestris.
Response.
Overruled. Continue.
Witness, please answer the question.
I'm sorry, sir. Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. So on April 30, or were you aware on April 30th, as you were having that dinner, that there was any tension between Sylvestris and Serval?
I mean, there always kind of seemed to be maybe some tension with Sylvestris, yeah.
And going to the night of the fire, did you hear the fire alarms?
No, I didn't. I was asleep and they didn't go off, which was really weird.
And afterward, you and Serval corralled the detective to explain everything that had been going on at the sanctuary. Is that right?
Yes, we wanted to tell him everything that was going on. I mean, there was some really suspicious stuff with Sylvestris and Barry being completely missing.
Objection, non-responsive. It is simply a yes or no. It's simply a yes or no question.
Response, Your Honor.
Sure.
my witness is testifying to what the council has asked her only. Her answer has not been is within the scope of the question. And he did not specify that it was a yes or no question either.
All right. I'm going to sustain the objection that it was non-responsive, but counsel, I suggest that maybe you try rephrasing it to get her to say what you want her to say a little clearer, and we'll try again.
Yes, Your Honor. So is it true or not that you and Serval talked to the detective after the fire about everything that had been going on at the sanctuary?
Yes.
And it wasn't until May 5th of 2020 that you decided to deliver this information about the quote in specifics that you claim to have forgotten after talking to Arota?
Yes, I wanted the police to know everything that had happened, the full story. Yes.
And you didn't testify to the specifics of the quote the night of the fire, correct?
Sir, honestly, I almost just died. I wasn't really in the right state of mind to remember everything.
So yes or no question?
Yes.
So were you aware that the fire had been intentionally set?
I was suspicious, pretty suspicious. I didn't know for certain.
And did you suspect Silvestris of the fire?
Yes, I did. I certainly did, especially because it makes sense that he'd want to destroy the footage I had of him that was incriminating.
So you suspected Silvestris of starting the fire, even though you weren't aware that the fire had been intentionally set. Is that correct?
Well, there being a fire in my shed at all was suspicious to me. Contributing to information that I learned later, yes.
It's a yes or no question.
Yes.
And your crew, Rex and Minolta, they quit about a week after Diardi was arrested. Isn't that right?
Yes, they did. I mean, I'm sure having a murder around it can be pretty scary. I wouldn't want to be there too.
Minolta, and you're unable to get back in contact with Minolta nor Rex, is that correct?
Unfortunately, I'm not able.
Relevance. How is this relevant to the charge of murder in the case today?
This is response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
This is establishing or exploring the possibilities of Perdalis Jacobidis being a suspect, as the prosecution, extremely narrow-minded, refused to look at any other possible suspect, and this is evaluating Perdalis Jacobidis and the reputation they maintained with their crew.
Overruled. Move forward.
The defense has no further questions, Your Honor.
Witness, please answer the question.
Could you repeat the question, sir?
And you haven't been able to get back in contact with neither Rex nor Minolta, is that right?
No, I haven't.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Do we have a redirect for this witness?
No redirect necessary, Your Honor. I asked that my witness be able to step down.
The witness is excused. May we call our third witness?
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution calls Detective Sundaleo to the stand.
All right.
Permission to proceed with direct examination, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Could you please state your name to the court?
Hello, my name is Sundaleo.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a detective with the Texoma City Police Department, the Major Crimes Unit.
How'd you become a detective?
Well, in 2010, I graduated second in my class from the Arklahoma Police Academy.
And what did you do after you graduated?
I began working as a patrol officer in Arklahoma for about 2 years, and since then, I've worked with the Texoma City Police Department for the past 8 years.
What type of detective are you?
Well, I began as a detective in the Narcotics Division, and since then, I've moved into the Major Crimes Unit.
What would you say your expertise is in?
Crime scene investigation.
Have you been involved in murder investigations before?
Yes, I've assisted in 3 murder investigations, and I've led 2 of my own. I was the lead investigator in the case involving the disappearance of Barry Bazaar.
And how did you get involved in that case?
Well, ultimately, the case developed into a murder investigation. But my first interaction came when, on May 3rd at about 8 a.m., I was called to the Big Cat Temple in response to a fire earlier that morning.
And what happened when you arrived?
I was approached by two people, Serval Arata, who is an employee there, and Pardalis Jacobidis, who is the filmmaker. I began my investigation by interviewing Jacobidis first.
Did you observe anything about Miss Jacobidis?
Yes, when I talked to her, she seemed disoriented and distracted, kind of rambling through her words. I would have called it an excited state of mind. However, I didn't think that this was unusual since she could have died in the fire and was clearly distraught over the situation.
What did you learn from your interview with her?
Well, she said that the fire was caused by DRD and that this was somehow connected to the death of Barry Bazaar.
And how was the fire connected to Mr. Bazaar's disappearance?
She believed the defendant had burned down the shed in order to destroy any incriminating evidence.
Objection.
On what grounds?
On the grounds that this witness just said that the Miss Jacobidis assumed a fact not said in testimony before, and that was said out of court.
Response?
Is the objection to hearsay or facts not in evidence?
It's going to be a statement that's not in evidence.
So, okay. Your Honor, this is an exception to hearsay under Rule 803-2, the excited utterance exception. I laid the foundation that Ms. Jacobidis was still distraught and in an excited state of mind from the fire that she had almost died in.
Okay, response?
Your Honor, the question being asked, the attorney had already laid down the.
Oh, we lost audio. Hold on. Before you keep eloquently going, I lost audio on my end. Can you guys hear her, or is it just me?
Myself for a second accidentally.
Oh, okay, there we go. All right. Sorry about that. Go ahead and start over.
Your Honor, the attorney had already established foundation with excited utterance for the previous question, but not for this one.
But this is part of the same circumstance, correct? The same situation?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay, the foundation is going to stand for everything that happened in that moment. So let's overrule it for now, but move along. You can proceed the way you were going.
Mm-hmm. I'll just restate my question. Detective Leo, how did Ms. Jacobidis say the fire was connected to Mr. Bazaar's disappearance?
Well, she believed that the defendant had burned down the shed in order to destroy any incriminating evidence.
Who did you interview next?
Next, I interviewed Serval Arata, who is Bazaar's personal assistant.
And without testifying to specific contents of the interview, what did you learn from Ms. Arata?
Well, she told me about her whereabouts on the night of the fire and how she was also concerned about the disappearance of Barry Bazaar.
Did you hear Ms. Arata's testimony about the tension between Mr. Bazaar and the defendant right before Mr. Bazaar disappeared?
Yes, I did.
And was her testimony consistent with what you learned?
Yes, it was.
What did you do after interviewing Ms. Arata?
I looked around in the remains of Ms. Jacobidis' shed.
And what did you observe about the shed?
There were two things that I noticed, and the first was that it appeared that the door lock had been pried away.
What did that evidence suggest to you?
That someone had broken into the shed and intentionally started the fire. Arson.
What was the second thing you learned about her shed?
Well, after I looked through lots of burnt film and filming equipment, I noticed that the smoke detector had disconnected batteries.
Your Honor, may I instruct the witness to turn to Exhibit 4?
Is that the one of the ones that's been entered?
It is not, but I'm entering it currently.
Okay, then yes, you may.
Detective Leo, can you identify this exhibit?
Yes, this is the lab report from the forensics team.
Did you use this report in your investigation?
Yes, I did.
Is this a true and correct copy of the forensics report?
Yes, it is.
And has it been changed or altered in any way?
No.
Was this report made at or near the time of your investigation?
Yes, it was.
And was it kept in the regular course of business?
Yes.
Was making it a regular course of business?
Yes, it was.
Are you a custodian or qualified witness to this document?
I am.
And is the source of this information trustworthy?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit 4 into evidence as a business record under Rule 803-6.
Any objections, defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, the exhibit is entered. You may proceed.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd also like to publish Exhibit 4 to the jury so that they're able to follow along.
Go for it.
Now, Detective Leo, were any fingerprints found on the smoke detector?
Yes, if you look under the heading smoke detector and shed on the lab report, you'll see that it says in bold, the fingerprints on the smoke detector match the right index finger and the right thumb of Sylvester Stiardi.
Now, were any other fingerprints found on the smoke detector?
No, no other fingerprints, just Stiardi's.
And what did you do after investigating the shed?
Well, I interviewed Kit Manul, who showed me around the White Cat cage.
And did you see anything unusual in the cage?
Not with my own eyes, but just to be sure, I called in forensics and they took swab samples from everything.
Did those samples reveal anything?
Yes, if you look back to the lab report, you'll see under blood trace evidence in bold that the first swab matches the DNA of Sylvester Stiardi, and the second swab matches the DNA of Barry Bizarre.
Did you interview anyone else?
Yes, the last person I interviewed was Sylvester Stiardi.
And do you know where the defendant was the night of April 30th?
Sylvester Stiardi was alone on the grounds with Barry Bizarre after the rest of the staff had left around 7:30 p.m. for errands.
And was the defendant alone with Mr. Bizarre?
Yes, he was.
What did the defendant do that night?
She claimed she had gone on a run.
And did you notice anything about the defendant?
Yes, I noticed that Stiardi had some cuts and scrapes on her neck and arms from one of the cats.
Did she tell you anything else?
Yes, the last thing she told me was that a few of the property security cameras, including the ones that face the White Cat cage, had recently been malfunctioning.
Did this conclude your interviews on May 3rd?
Yes, it did.
After those interviews, what did you do next?
Well, I went to check on Miss Sarada's alibi.
Did you ever look into what happened to Mr. Bizarre's boat?
Yes, on May 4th, I asked the Coast Guard to perform a search for it.
And were they able to find anything?
No, after 2 weeks, they had found nothing.
Did you ever interview the witnesses again?
Yes, actually, Pardalis Jacobidis came back to the station on her own initiative.
And why did she want to see you?
Well, as Ms. Jacobidis has already testified today in court, she wanted to tell me about some footage she had where the defendant said, "Wouldn't it be perfect karma if Barry was eaten by the White Cat?"
Was this testimony helpful to your investigation?
Yes, it was critical.
Did you make an arrest after your investigation?
Yes, I arrested Sylvester Stiardi for the murder of Barry Bizarre.
And why did you arrest the defendant and charge her with murder?
After conducting a careful and thorough investigation, I concluded that there was probable cause to arrest and charge Sylvester Stiardi for the murder of Barry Bizarre.
Do you know if the defendant had anything to gain from Mr. Bizarre's death?
Yes, the defendant was the beneficiary of Mr. Bizarre's will, so she stood to gain his entire estate.
And when do you believe the defendant would have been able to kill Mr. Bizarre?
Well, the evidence suggests that it would have been between 7:30 and 11 p.m. when the defendant was alone with Mr. Bizarre on the grounds.
And how do you believe the defendant killed Mr. Bizarre?
Again, as the evidence suggests, I believe that the cuts and scrapes are evidence that it was by one of the cats, along with the blood found in the cage. And as Ms. Arata already testified, the defendant had neglected to feed the cat in the days leading up to April the 30th.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
All right, defense, you may proceed with your cross.
Good afternoon, Detective Leo. You are a detective, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you have worked with narcotics and major crimes?
Yes, I have.
So it's safe to say you have experience, yes?
Yes, I do.
But that experience includes only 5 murder investigations, correct?
That's correct.
And you have been lead detective on only 2 of those 5, correct?
Yes.
Have you ever been to the Big Cat Temple before this case?
No, but I definitely had heard of it.
And you were called on the night of May 3rd when there was a fire?
That's correct.
Do you have any direct experience with fire investigations or determinations of arson versus non-arson?
I'm not an arson expert, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, in previous testimony, you say you are positive that it was arson.
That's what I came to conclude based on the evidence.
On the night of May 15th, the arson investigator contacted you, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with Exhibit 4?
Yes.
You recognize this document, correct?
Yes, I do.
And please read the line in paragraph 2 after Tixoma.
We understand that a fire occurred at a shed at the Big Cat Temple, and that the fire marshal believes arson was possible but could not reach a conclusive opinion. The results of our forensic analysis and testing are set forth below.
So just for clarification, the fire marshal was not able to reach a conclusion as to whether this was arson.
No, they did not.
Moving on to the day of your investigation, you conducted interviews after arriving on scene on May 3rd, yes?
Yes, I did.
And you interviewed Ms. Jacobitis first.
That's correct.
Could you describe her demeanor when being interviewed?
Yes, she definitely seemed like she was in an excited state of mind. And like I said earlier, she was rambling through her words and seemed disoriented.
And in this, she accused Sylvestris Diardi, my client, of committing murder, correct?
She accused him of burning down the shed and, yes, said that she believed it was connected to Barry Bizarre's death.
And you noted down that accusation and made a note to follow up with it later, yes?
Yes, I definitely plan to look into it.
And is that because any plausible evidence of those allegations had been destroyed in the fire, correct?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question?
The reason you noted down that accusation and could not do anything else but note it down was because any plausible evidence of those allegations had been destroyed in the fire, correct?
Well, I did have the evidence of the fingerprints in the shed, which was something I was looking into.
And you interviewed Miss Arata after this, correct?
Yes, I did.
And Arata has a criminal record, yes?
Yes, I believe so.
Do you know what this criminal record is for?
Objection, Your Honor. Improper character evidence. This evidence of Mr. Arata's criminal conviction cannot be admitted into court.
Response?
Your Honor, this is not for the truth of the matter asserted. This is simply to show that Miss Arata has a criminal record in relation to arson, which is the line of questioning that I'm continuing on right now.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
Opposing counsel listed not for the truth of the matter asserted as the exception to improper character evidence, and that is an exception to hearsay.
Correct. The objection is sustained.
Your Honor, may I continue with questioning?
Yes, but you may not touch, unless you have foundational basis for why that's relevant, you may not touch on the criminal history.
All right. What did you gather from your interview that Arata was doing on the night of April 30th?
She had told me that she went on errands and then had gone to Snoopy's pub.
And from this interview, you gathered that Arata was immediately able to produce a receipt from the Wiesbaum store, correct?
That's correct.
But claims to have paid cash at the pub and therefore had no receipt from there, correct?
Yes, that's also correct.
And you further investigated her alibi for being at the pub, yes?
Yes, I did.
What did you find at the pub?
Well, I talked to the bartender when I was there, and they told me that it had been a busy night, but that Arata was a regular customer.
And after that, you said that this was good enough for you and then left the pub, correct?
Yes, I did continue on with my investigation after that.
After that, you then performed an investigation of the burnt remains of the shed, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you said just now in your testimony that you noted a smoke detector's batteries appeared disconnected, correct?
That's correct.
And the door of the shed was pretty messed up, was it not?
It was.
And you said the lock to the shed appeared to have been pried away from the door frame.
That's correct.
But you were not able to determine how this happened, yes?
No, but this was the most likely conclusion that I came to based on the evidence.
So other than the fingerprints, you were not able to make any solid conclusions from your side investigation, correct?
No, just the conclusions I came to based on the evidence I already told you.
You then at 10:45 a.m. interviewed Kip Manul, yes?
That's correct.
And Manul gave you a play-by-play from her perspective of the events on the night of April 30th.
Yes, that's correct.
Did you gather anything unusual from Manul's interview?
Well, Manul talked to me, I believe, about how the cages had been cleaned, which seemed odd. And I looked into the cage more after that.
After interviewing Shausnamir, you then interviewed my client, Miss Diarty.
Yes, I did.
And Diarty briefly described her relationship with Bazaar.
Yes, that's correct.
Could you tell us what you gathered from that?
Well, I guess based on the
Objection, Your Honor. Time has expired.
Yeah.
You do have, I think it's a little under a minute for redirect if you want to use it.
No, Your Honor. No redirect necessary.
Okay. So we are done with the prosecution. I have no announcements between moving sides, but I do need to take a quick couple minute at most recess. So if anyone needs to use the bathroom or do anything, you're getting a gift right now. Take full advantage of it, and I'll be right back, and we'll start with the defense. All right, is everybody still here? Counsel? Defense team?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are you ready to proceed with your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense would first like to call the stand Kip Manul.
All right. You may proceed.
Could you please state your name?
My name is Kip Manul.
What is your position at the Big Cat Temple Sanctuary?
If I had an official title, it would be something like handy human, but I'd like to think of myself as senior maintenance and repair technician. I am the only maintenance and repair technician, but when Kip Manul is your tech, you don't need anyone else.
Where did you work before the Big Cat Sanctuary?
Texoma Motorhomes. Actually, it's through that job working with motor and mobile homes that my journey to the Big Cat Temple sort of began. See what I did there?
Can you elaborate on what happened?
Well, I just finished tuning up this sweet little Winnebago, and I knew I should have parked her when I was finished, but I had to take her for a spin. She was making such a racket that I couldn't even hear the police sirens. But seriously, if the cops don't want you to slalom through their cars, why would they park them in a line like that? That's just a dare, and everyone knows you can't back down from a dare.
How exactly did that work for you leading to working for Barry?
Well, they charged me with a lot of stuff, and I ended up pleading guilty to some mid-level misdemeanor called reckless driving, and I got 6 months. I was really nervous for what I would do when I got out, but I was really happy to be placed with Barry because he gives second chances to people with criminal records.
Could you describe what it's like working at the sanctuary?
My job at the Big Cat Temple doesn't pay much, but it does come with a free room and board in this beautiful mobile home. It also has a beautiful view of the Texoma Bay. And what's more, you can move it, just saying.
How long have you worked at the Temple Cat Sanctuary?
4.5 years.
In all your years at the sanctuary, how would you describe the relationship between the defendant and Barry Bizarre?
They were friends, but they got really close after that tiger decided to work his issues out on Barry.
The tiger attack, can you explain what happened then?
We had this one scare in August with this new tiger. The cat turned and just went right after Barry, just pia. And out of nowhere, Sylvester just jumped in the cage and wrestled that big cat off of Barry. On that day, Sylvester showed a really big, a selfless catitude. You know, like cat and attitude, just kind of smushed together.
Who was in charge of cleaning the cages?
Me.
Would anyone ever help you?
Sometimes Serval would, but Sylvester never helped cleaning, even if no one else was around.
What happened after the cat attack?
Barry put Sylvester in his will after the cat attack. He left Sylvester everything. Unless something happened to Sylvester, then it would go to Serval. It kind of made me nervous how he wrote by writing this will that way, Barry put 2 cats in the same cage with only 1 piece of meat. You know what I mean?
Have you ever heard the defendant wish any tragedy upon Barry?
Well, I heard PJ claim that Sylvester said karma was going to catch up with Barry and he'd be...
Hearsay. This witness testified to a statement made out of court.
Response?
Your Honor, this statement has been brought up earlier in the trial, and the statement is not being stated for the truth of the matter. My witness is simply specifying what Pardalis' state of mind was, and the witness is attesting to the number of times she has heard something of similar context be said, which is none.
Sustained. Let's ask it a different way and avoid talking about what other people said.
Would Sylvester ever talk down upon Barry?
I don't believe Sylvester would have risked his life and limb for a crazy man. We've known him for a long time, and he wouldn't turn his back on us and Barry in the Big Cat Temple.
Going back to Pardalis Jacobidis, how would you describe the filming of his documentary?
Barry gave PJ somewhere to live on the site called The Shed. PJ just followed everyone around, asking all these questions and getting everyone stirred up. The more time PJ spent with us, the worse it got.
Could you elaborate on that last part?
He made the milk turn sour. He just kept digging and digging, and I think trying to break up the friendship between Barry and Sylvester.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. This witness is speculating as to the motive behind another person's actions.
Response?
Okay. Your Honor, this is my witness's reasonable evaluation of PJ. She lived with PJ on site. They saw the actions that PJ took and like what PJ would say. It's reasonable for them to assume that PJ was trying to break up the friendship.
I'm going to sustain the objection based on the way that the witness responded. If you want to ask the question a different way and the witness produces an answer that's a little less speculative and a little more based on the actions they've observed, we can proceed that way.
Okay. How did PJ's presence change the way that the people living on the sanctuary acted and felt towards one another?
PJ kept digging and digging. And I think it created some drama between the people that were living at the Big Cat Sanctuary.
Where were you on the evening of April 30th?
After dinner, I took a part-time employee, Bob something, to a meat processing plant a few hours away.
What time did you return from the plant?
1:30 a.m. the next day, May 1st officially.
Can you provide some insight as to how the meat processing room appeared when you arrived?
The meat processing room looked like it had been used a few hours earlier, and it smelled like it had been used too.
Can you say for certain who it was that used the processors prior to your arrival?
No, I can't.
Earlier that same night, Sylvester claims to have gone running. Can you tell us about his running history?
Sylvester would go running all the time, usually for an hour or more. He starts out running south past the marina and does a big loop around the sanctuary. I think it's like 10 miles or something.
What did you do May 2nd, the day after?
I learned that the Cat's Ironic was not at the boat where Barry kept her. People were saying he could have taken another one of his unannounced trips, so I went to the marina to see if I could figure anything out. I ended up talking to the Marine who kept the Cat's Ironic in tip-top shape.
Could you explain what you mean by one of his unannounced trips?
Well, with the supplies on board, Barry could pretty much pick up and take a 3 or 4 day trip. And if the fishing was good, it could last even longer. It wasn't uncommon for Barry to just blow off some steam and go on a trip that could last several days.
So what did you learn while at the marina?
I learned the GPS on the Cat's Ironic had been turned off on April 30th around 11:10 p.m., which is when I would be heading back from the meat processing plant.
Was there anything else that you learned while at the marina?
I learned that the Cat's Ironic usually had a locator which sends a signal to the Coast Guard if a boat was in distress. It's called the...
Your Honor.
Yeah.
These are all statements learned through hearsay, which are out-of-court statements and inadmissible.
Response?
Your Honor, my witness is not stating this for the truth of the matter. They're stating this to provide a timeline of the events that they went through on May 2nd.
Response?
It would be the truth of the matter, correct?
This is like...
Yeah. So I'm going to sustain the objection unless you have some exhibit in order to present that can substantiate it, but I don't think that this particular witness is going to be able to properly testify to that, since they weren't possession of, any of the equipment for, tracking the GPS or anything like that. They're getting this from another witness. So objection, sustained. Let's look at it a different way.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I proceed with the questioning?
Yes, just not on things that she learned as far as trying to establish that those were actually things that were happening, since that's hearsay that she got from another witness.
Okay. So backtracking to your position at the sanctuary, what tasks are included as a part of your occupation?
Well, I turn all the wrenches, grease all the wheels, and patch all the holes. I try to keep the sanctuary purring like a cat on catnip. I'm also in charge of changing the lithium batteries and the smoke detectors around the sanctuary.
Would anyone ever help you change the batteries?
Sometimes Sylvester would help me from time to time.
Was Serval ever in charge of purchasing batteries for the detector?
No, he never was that I knew of.
Can you tell me about the night of the fire?
I woke up at 3 a.m. on May 3rd because the cats were making crazy noises. I opened the door and saw PJ's shed was on fire. After I calmed down from my excitement, I decided to call the fire department. I just watched PJ pace back and forth and complain about all the files that he had lost. I didn't have much sympathy.
Why didn't the smoke detectors work?
Those old smoke detectors we have are the worst. The battery only beeps when it's low, and if there's no battery or it's dead, it doesn't beep at all. Danger, danger.
Who was the first person to purchase these smoke detectors?
Serval purchased them a while back.
Who had access to Jacobus' shed?
Only PJ and Barry had access to the shed, and PJ kept it locked up tight when he wasn't there.
What did Jacobus keep in his shed?
He kept all kinds of computers, cables, all these power outlets, and it was really disorganized. I don't think the shed was meant to hold that much power.
Do you have any experience with fires?
Yes, ma'am, especially electrical fires. I know the smell of an electrical fire. It's this sort of burning plastic smell that I've probably smelled a dozen times before.
So what did the fire the morning of May 3rd smell like to you?
I stand by what I said in the 911 call. It smelled like an electrical fire.
So what was the cause of the fire in Jacobus's shed the morning of May 3rd?
Objection, Your Honor. This question calls for speculation. This witness can't testify to the cause of the fire. She's not an expert in arson or electrical fires.
Response?
Your Honor, this is the witness's reasonable evaluation based off of their experience with fires and their knowledge of Jacobus as to what could have been the cause of the fire.
I'm going to sustain the objection. This witness is not an expert on fires, even if they have anecdotal experience with fire. So for that particular question, we'll exclude that answer and move on.
Thank you, Your Honor. What can you tell us about Detective Leo?
He showed up later that morning and asked everyone questions and wanted to talk to me. I just told him everything I knew.
Did you ever hear from him after that?
No, or any other police person either. Detective Leo did arrest Sylvester on May 20th, but I couldn't even understand why.
Do you have any evidence to believe Barry is dead?
No, there isn't even any evidence. The police are just assuming he's gone and took way too long to start the Coast Guard search. Barry could be out there on the Cat's Ironic, and he might need a floaty more than he would need.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Response?
Your Honor, this is Kip Manul's reasonable conclusion as far as the evidence that they have been presented with, which is none.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
Don't believe the witness nor opposing counsel has laid the foundation for Ms. Manul to rationally opine as to Mr. Bizarre being missing for 8 months at sea and still alive.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to sustain the objection. If you want to set some sort of further foundation and how she would have experience or knowledge that would be credible to this, that's within the case file, you're welcome to it. But I think we need to move along.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay.
Cross-examination?
Yes, sir.
Now, Ms. Manul, you used to work at mobile homes before your time at the sanctuary, right?
Correct.
And one day you decided to go for a joyride in a Winnebago at warp speed, correct?
Correct.
There were screaming kids in the back, right?
The engine was too loud for me to hear.
But there were screaming kids in the back?
Yes.
And you ran through a police barricade, correct?
Correct.
You were charged with grand theft, attempted murder, and reckless endangerment?
I only pleaded guilty to reckless.
Yeah, you need to say objection and rather than just raise your hand, but you're objecting?
Yes, more prejudicial than probative.
Response?
Your Honor, this line of questioning is actually more probative than prejudicial because evidence about a dishonest act is admissible under Rule 609A2. It's important for the jury to hear about this witness's dishonest act to show that this witness lacks credibility.
And what are you alleging was the dishonest part of this act?
Theft.
She worked there, right? She was allowed to be in possession of the RV. She just took it for a joyride, and she wasn't convicted of theft, correct?
No, she was not convicted.
Okay. So I'm going to say this is going to be more prejudicial than probative, and the line of questioning should be entirely excluded. Let's move on.
On April 30th, you went to a meat processing plant to purchase food for the cats, right?
Correct.
It was the defendant's idea to go, correct?
Correct.
But the defendant didn't go with you to pick up the meat.
Correct.
Now, the meat processing plant was several hours away from the sanctuary. In fact, 3 hours away one way, right?
Yes.
And you returned at 1:30 a.m. on May 1st, right?
Yes.
So you don't know what happened while you were gone, right?
No.
Well, when you got back, you saw that the meat processing room had been used.
Yes.
And the grinders also smelled like they had been used.
Yes.
You know how to use the grinders, right?
Yes, I do.
And as you heard today in Ms. Alrada's testimony, it's the defendant that's in charge of feeding the cats, correct?
Correct.
So she also knows how to use the grinders.
Correct.
You're responsible for the maintenance of sanctuary grounds and property, right?
Yes.
And that involves changing the batteries and the smoke detectors around the sanctuary.
Yes.
But you don't always do that well, do you?
The batteries themselves barely even beep, but correct.
So that's a yes, you don't always do your job well?
Correct.
Now, the defendant would sometimes help you out and cover for you, correct?
Yes.
And you were present in court when Detective Leo testified, right?
Yes.
And you know that only the defendant's fingerprints were found in the smoke detector in Ms. Jacobidis' shed.
Yes.
But your fingerprints were not found.
Correct.
Even though you also changed the batteries?
Correct.
So the defendant must have been the last person to touch the smoke detector.
Correct.
You also have to make sure security cameras are running.
Yes.
And you heard that in Detective Leah's testimony, a few cameras, including the ones in the Y-Cat cage, they were malfunctioning.
Yes.
So on the night of Mr. Bizarre's murder, there is no footage of what was happening in the Y-Cat cage.
Correct.
And there's no footage because you didn't maintain the cameras.
Correct.
The day after Mr. Bizarre disappeared, you noticed cuts and scrapes on the defendant, right?
Yes.
And they're similar to cuts and scrapes he had gotten before from the big cats.
If you get cut, you bleed.
But redirecting you back to my question, they were similar to the cuts and scrapes that he had gotten before from the big cats.
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Opinionated testimony by a lay witness. This witness can't testify that they're completely similar. They just know they were cuts. They can't say if they came from the tiger or not.
Response?
Your Honor, I never said that they were the exact same. I just stated that they were similar to cuts and scrapes gotten from the big cats before.
Overruled. I think the average person is able to tell if something is at least similar as far as wounds go. Continue.
Now, you believe that the fire in Ms. Jacobidis' shed was an electrical fire, right?
Yes, I do.
But you're not an arson expert.
I have smelled that smell a dozen times before.
But you have no training identifying causes of fire, right?
I'm not an expert, but I do have a lot of experience.
You're really just only using your nose.
Correct.
So you don't know what caused the fire.
For sure, I don't know.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor. I asked that my witness be able to step down.
The witness may step down. You may call your next witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Sylvester Stiardi to the stand.
You may proceed.
Good afternoon. Could you please state your name for the record?
My name is Sylvester Stiardi, but my friends call me Sylvie.
Could you tell the jury a little bit about yourself?
I had a really tough life growing up, and I actually fell in with the wrong crowd. I got sent to prison, but because of my behavior as a model prisoner, I got out on parole before the end of my sentence.
And where do you currently live, Ms. Stiardi?
At the Big Cat Temple.
How did you end up meeting Mr. Bizarre?
A chaplain recommended me for a job opening.
And when did Mr. Bizarre hire you?
Barry hired me in May 2018, so I've known him for over 2 years now, and I'm so thankful that he hired me.
Could you describe what you do at the Big Cat Temple?
I help with exercising and feeding the cats and cleaning their enclosures.
And what do your jobs at the sanctuary include in regards to YCAT?
Well, I'm responsible for feeding YCAT and cleaning its cage.
Has YCAT ever drawn blood from you?
Oh, tons of times. YCAT's moods are super up and down, and as the person responsible for feeding YCAT and cleaning the cage, it's expected.
What was your relationship with Mr. Bazaar like?
He was like a father to me. By hiring me off parole, he pretty much saved my life, and I would do the same for him in a heartbeat.
Could you tell the court what happened in August of 2019?
In August of 2019, we had just gotten a new cat that had been abused, and Barry thought he could be friends with it. The cat immediately leapt at Barry, so I went into the enclosure and distracted it so Barry could get out.
And how did your relationship with Mr. Bazaar change after that?
The whole experience strengthened our bond, and he would always call me kiddo. After that, he even changed his will to make me the primary beneficiary.
Moving on to your feeding of YCAT, what meat would you normally purchase?
Meat that was past its sell-by date.
And if you couldn't obtain this?
We would buy carcasses from the Texoma Meatpacking Company that didn't pass inspection.
Could you define not passing inspection?
Well, it's meat that isn't good enough to be sold to restaurants and grocery stores.
Would that mean it's gone bad?
No, not at all. That just means it's not fit for human consumption, but it's perfectly fine for big cats.
And do you usually buy meat from the Texoma Meatpacking Company?
Yes.
So why on April 30th did you send Kip Manula and Bob to buy meat from Steers End Meat Rendering Plant?
Well, I had learned a day or two before that they were closing down and had this fire sale, so I wanted to save money and buy as much meat as possible.
Your Honor, may I show the witness what has been marked for identification as Exhibit 7?
Yes.
Do you recognize this document?
I do. These are my feeding notes.
Your Honor, as this has already been admitted into evidence, I will now proceed to questioning about the content.
Proceed.
Could you please read the notes from 5:45 p.m. on April 27th?
Not enough meat has been processed to feed YCAT. We'll try again in the morning. Meat is being processed right now.
And the notes from 4 p.m. on April 28th?
Isabel not fed because food still left over from previous day, perhaps not eating again. YCAT in another mood and unable to feed.
And lastly, the notes from 10:15 a.m. on April 29th.
Fed the middle 5 cages, still waiting on meat processing.
Your Honor, as this has already been published to the jury, I will continue with questioning.
Please do.
May I show the witness what has been marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 1?
Yes.
I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit 1 for identification. Do you recognize this document?
I do.
Could you please describe what this document is?
This is a map of the sanctuary.
Your Honor, I offer Exhibit 1 into evidence.
I have no objection, Your Honor, as both parties have agreed to its stipulated admissibility.
All right, you may proceed. So admitted.
Could you please identify what the X in the middle 5 cages on the map signifies?
Yes, that is YCAT's cage.
Your Honor, may I publish Exhibit 1 to the jury for reference?
You may.
What time on April 30th did you send Manula and Bob to Steers End?
6:30 p.m.
And was this the same night that you asked Serval Arata to buy cameras?
Yes, I sent her to buy cameras and cables from the Weiss by M store. A couple of the cameras in the cat cages were on the fritz, so I wanted to make sure they'd be replaced as soon as possible.
And which store did you send her to?
The one in Melissa, which is about 90 minutes away from the sanctuary.
Why that store?
Well, I called the local one to let them know Arata was coming, but they were out of stock, and the Melissa store had the stuff we needed.
And what about you? Where were you that night?
I was in my trailer. At around 9:30 p.m., I texted Arata and told her that I was going for a run, which is why I probably wouldn't be back when she returned.
And did you take your phone with you on your run?
No, I left it in the trailer.
Did you see anyone else while you were running?
Yes, and I yelled out to Maureen as I passed the marina.
How long do you think you were running for?
I got back to the sanctuary at around 11:15 p.m.
And what did you do after your run?
I took a dip in the Texoma Bay Lagoon.
Did you see anyone when you got back?
No, but I did see Arata's car next to her cabin. I have no idea where she was, but I did hear machinery going off in the meat processing room.
Objection, Your Honor. Diardi just testified that she saw Serval's car. However, she just said there's no testimony today that it is for sure Arata's car. It could have been, but she does not have personal knowledge as to whether or not it actually was Arata's car. She can just speculate to this.
Wait, is it response?
Your Honor, Serval Arata and Miss Diardi have been living in the sanctuary together for a while now, and Miss Diardi has seen Serval's car multiple times, so it's within the scope of her reason to assume that the car that she saw was indeed Serval's car.
Right. So, prosecution, what you're alleging is this could potentially be the same exact car with a different license plate?
Yes, Your Honor. All that Diardi knows is that it is a sedan, and Ms. Diardi just testified that she, in fact, did not see a single person that night at the sanctuary after her run.
Overruled. It's fine. Moving along.
What about the truck that Manuel and Bob took to get meat?
Well, I normally would have passed that truck, but I didn't see it that night.
Just for clarification, you did not see anyone other than Marine during and after your run.
Yes, that's correct.
Moving to Mr. Bazaar for a bit, in your time at the sanctuary, has Barry ever sailed away without warning?
Multiple times, yes, to the small islands, Roy Island and Siegfried Island, just opposite Texoma Bay.
Back to the night of April 30th. Did anyone at the sanctuary get worried about Barry?
Yes, actually, Arata wanted to call the police, but I thought it was a little too quick to be concerned.
Why?
Well, because Barry has sailed off without warning, as I said so before, I thought calling the police this early was a bit much, and I was confident that Barry would just sail into the marina any minute now.
And was there a typhoon that night?
Yes, there was.
Did it intercept Mr. Bazaar's boat path?
Well, I only found out a day later, but yes, it did.
What did you do when you learned the typhoon had crossed the path of Mr. Bazaar's boat?
I urged Arata to call the Coast Guard, but she wanted to call the police instead.
And did she?
I don't think she called either of them that night.
Your Honor, may I show the witness what has been marked for identification as Exhibit 2?
Yes.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Could you describe for the court what this document is?
It is a map marking the path of Barry's boat and the path of Typhoon Judy.
Your Honor, I offer Exhibit 2 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor, as both parties have agreed to its admissibility.
Proceed.
Could you show us where Typhoon Judy's path was in relation to Bazaar's boat?
Yes, it traveled right in front of Siegfried Island.
Is that why you asked Arata to call the Coast Guard?
Yes, I was really worried that Barry had gotten swept up in the storm.
Do you know if the islands were searched at all?
Well, they were, but it only started several days after April 30th.
Your Honor, may I publish Exhibit 2 to the jury for reference purposes?
You may.
Moving to the night of May 3rd, could you describe what happened?
I'm honestly not sure. A fire started in Jacobitis' shed, and by the time I got to her shed, they had already called the fire department. They were investigating for arson, but that didn't make any sense to me.
Why not?
Well, the fire started in Jacobitis' shed, and I have personally seen her smoke cigarettes a lot in both her shed and trailer.
Did you handle the smoke detector on the night of May 3rd?
No, I did not.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with Exhibit 6?
You may.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, it's a purchase receipt.
Your Honor, as this has already been admitted into evidence, I will now proceed to questioning about the content.
Continue.
Who purchased these items?
Serval Arata. This was one I sent her to the We Spy Am store in Melissa.
And what did you ask her to purchase?
Just the cameras and cables.
Do you know why she bought the batteries?
I don't. I didn't ask her to. It seems
Speculation. The only way that she would have known why Arata bought the batteries would have been through a conversation that they had had, and this would have been hearsay as well.
Wasn't the question, do you know why she brought the batteries?
Yes, Your Honor, but I would change my objection to hearsay, as the only way that she would know this would have been between it, as she only would have known this through a conversation.
I'm gonna overrule it, but have the witness clarify how they know this, so we know if it's from hearsay.
It's
Your Honor, the witness, the answer to this question is the witness that does not know why Serval Arata bought the batteries.
Okay, then continue on.
I'll ask the question again. Do you know why she bought the batteries?
I don't, and I didn't ask her to. And it seems strange that she knew that those batteries were missing for some of the alarms, and those aren't the right type of batteries.
Could you elaborate on that a little?
Well, we don't use lithium batteries for the smoke detectors in the sanctuary. They just wouldn't work.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Permission to cross, Your Honor.
Yes, continue.
Now, let's first talk about April the 30th, the night of Bizarre's disappearance. Now, Jacobidis and his crew left for town that night, didn't they?
Yes.
And you know that they always left the sanctuary on Thursday nights, don't you?
Yes.
And April the 30th was a Thursday, wasn't it?
Yes.
And on April the 30th, Miss Arata was sent to the We Spy 'Em store in Melissa. Is that right?
Correct.
And she left at around 7:30 p.m.?
Yes.
But this store was 90 minutes away one way, wasn't it?
Yes.
So she wouldn't have gotten back until after 10:30 p.m.?
Yes.
However, there is one much closer to the sanctuary, isn't there, Miss Diarty?
Yes, there is.
But you said that the closer one didn't have the necessary cameras, is that correct?
Yes.
However, Miss Arata managed to find these cameras at the close store, didn't she?
She did.
Now, you also sent Miss Manuel off to a meat plant, didn't you?
Yes.
And she left at around 6:30 p.m.?
Yes.
And this plant was a 3-hour drive one way from the sanctuary, wasn't it?
Yes.
So you knew that Miss Manuel wouldn't be back until after midnight?
Yes.
But there is a meat plant much closer called the Texoma Meat Plant Company that is much closer to the sanctuary, isn't there?
Yes, but this one was having a sale.
Exactly. So you decided to not send her to the close one?
Yes.
So, Ms. Diarty, on April the 30th, you sent all the sanctuary employees away on errands, didn't you?
Yes.
So, to your personal knowledge, you and Mr. Bizarre were the only ones left at the sanctuary that night on April the 30th. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you claim that you went on a run at around 9:30 p.m. Is that correct?
Yes.
But to your knowledge, nobody saw you run, did they?
Well, I did yell out to Maureen in the beginning of my run.
But redirecting you back to my question, to your knowledge, nobody actually saw you run. Is that correct?
Yes, nobody saw me run.
And you did not see anyone, did you?
No, I didn't.
So to your knowledge, there is no one here in court today that can confirm your whereabouts or actions, is there?
Well, Maureen can, because Maureen saw me in the beginning.
Ms. Diarty, I'm not asking about the beginning. I'm talking about that night after everybody left when you were on your run. Nobody can confirm your whereabouts or actions. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Arata testified today that she wanted to call the police about Barry's disappearance. Is that right?
That's correct.
But you told Ms. Arata to chill and wait, didn't you?
Yes, because Barry's done this before.
Because you were not in any hurry to find Mr. Bizarre, were you?
Well, I just thought he just sailed away again, as he does.
Redirecting you back to my question, you initially were in no hurry to find Mr. Bizarre, were you?
Yes.
So the police did not arrive until 2 full days after Mr. Bizarre had disappeared, is that right?
That's correct.
And by that time, the machines had been cleaned, hadn't they?
Yes.
Now, the Big Cat Sanctuary is a sanctuary for big cats, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And these cats are dangerous wild animals, aren't they?
Yes.
And you knew that Bizarre had been attacked by a cat before.
Yes.
And you heard Mr. Arata testify that the white cat had only been fed once in 4 days before April the 30th. Is that correct?
Yes, it was fed on April 29th because it was in a mood before then.
And you're the one that's in charge of feeding the cats, is that right?
That is right.
So this isn't your first time you've been in a courtroom, right, Ms. Diarty?
No.
You've been in trouble with the law before, haven't you?
Yes, I have, and I'm not proud of that.
You started burglarizing homes, didn't you?
I did in my late teens.
And you got caught once, is that right?
I did, but because of me being a model prisoner, I only had to serve some of my sentence.
But redirecting you back to my question, you did get caught for burglary, is that right?
That is right.
And you were convicted, weren't you?
Evidence.
And you received a severe sentence of 10 years, didn't you?
I did. I didn't serve all of it.
Because you had also torched a home to cover up your burglary, didn't you?
No, I was accused of torching a home. I did not torch that home.
But you said that your sentence was so heavy because they believed that you did torch the home.
They believe that, yes.
So, Ms. Giardi, you know how to commit a crime, don't you?
Yes.
And you know how to cover it up, don't you?
Yes.
And you set fire to Mr. Jacobittis' shed to destroy incriminating evidence, didn't you?
No, I did not.
Now, you are currently in debt, aren't you?
I am, yes.
In fact, you owe thousands of dollars in gambling losses, don't you?
I do.
Objection, relevance.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
If Ms. Giardi were to be the one to inherit the sanctuary, my further line of questioning will go to show that this will, in fact, help her pay off the debts that she has, and this gives her a motive, and motive is always relevant.
Response.
As of right now, Your Honor, I don't think that opposing counsel has laid the foundation to ask about the gambling habit, and in further line of questioning, it may be relevant, but as of right now, that question is not.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes.
I'm using this line of questioning, asking her about her gambling losses to show that she, in fact, would need to keep this job, and it would benefit her if she inherited the will. This line of questioning is going to lay the foundation for that further line of questioning.
Yeah, I'm going to overrule the objection just because I don't know of a better way to ask if she has gambling debts, and I think that it is probative to the motive and relevant. So let's continue.
I'll re-ask my question. You owe these losses because of gambling, don't you?
That's correct.
And you've been trying to pay off this debt, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
But you're not currently able to do so, are you?
Well, I'm working on it.
Now, if you lost this job, you wouldn't be able to pay off this debt, would you?
No.
Because you only get paid $550 a week for your job. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, you know that you're the beneficiary of Barry Bizarre's will, don't you?
Yes.
And inheriting from Bizarre's will would help you pay off these debts, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And Barry has changed his will several times since you've known him. Is that right?
That is correct.
And shortly before Mr. Bizarre mysteriously disappeared, you had an argument with him, didn't you?
Yes.
And you were concerned that he would fire you, weren't you?
Yes, but a part of me knew that he wouldn't do that.
And you were also afraid that he would cut you out of his will, weren't you?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. I ask that the witness be able to step down at this point.
The witness may step down. We can proceed with your next witness.
The defense would like to call to the stand Chaz Nehmeyer.
Proceed.
Good afternoon, Ms. Nehmeyer. Could you please state your name and age for the record?
My name is Chaz Nehmeyer. You can call me Marine. I'm 49 years old.
And where do you live?
I live at the marina.
So you live at the marina. Do you happen to work there?
I do indeed.
And how long have you been working at the marina?
10 years and counting.
There's quite a bit of boats at the marina. Do you work on all of them?
I work on all the ones that people let me get my hands on. Not everybody will let me touch their boats.
And who owns these boats?
Oh, loads of people. Like Barry Bizarre up at the sanctuary, he owns one. And I know a snazzy lawyer over here that owns one as well.
And how long have you been working with Bizarre?
I've been working with him since I started working at the marina, so 10 years.
And how far apart are yours and Bizarre's boats at the marina?
From me to Bizarre, it'd be 40 feet.
And what type of vessel does Bizarre own?
Ooh, he owns a nice little beauty. It's an Albine Vega 27, calls it the Cat Ironic.
And how many people could fit on their boat?
4 people could fit on it, but if you want to be comfortable, I'd say 2.
How many were needed to operate it?
Only 1.
So what would you say is the quality of Bizarre's boat, this Cat Ironic?
Oh, the Cat Ironic, that type of vessel, it's a nice little boat. It's tougher than it looks, you know. It can be taken across the open ocean if you really wanted to.
So what condition was Bizarre's boat in?
But Bazaar's boat was in ship shape. I always kept it up to par.
And what did you keep Bazaar's boat stocked with?
I kept it stocked with lights, food, water, EPIRB, loads of stuff, the necessities.
Let's take a step back for a second. Can you describe to the court what an EPIRB is?
An EPIRB is an emergency position indicator radio beacon. It's used so if the boat were to go underwater or be submerged in water, you could then track it and it sends off pings.
It's quite a handy device. Was it on Bazaar's boat on April 30th?
At that time, it was not.
Did you happen to tell Bazaar that the EPRB wasn't working properly?
I did. I told him on April 27th.
So if you told Bazaar on April 27th, why wasn't the EPRB back on the Bazaar's boat by April 30th?
I didn't get one of the necessary parts that was needed to fix it.
Did you happen to tell anyone or Bazaar that the EPRB wasn't back on the boat?
I didn't tell anyone. The only person I told was Barry, but that was the 27th.
As you stated, Bazaar's boat was always in ship-shape condition. Why was this?
Well, Serval and I would always converse on how it needed to be and how it should look, because Barry liked to go on sailabouts a lot.
Could you describe to the court what a sailabout is?
Well, for all y'all land lovers, that's when somebody picks up and just sails off unannounced.
And how often would Bazaar go on these sailabouts unannounced?
Oh man, all the time.
And how long was Barry typically gone?
It depended on how he was feeling. It could be 3 days, up to a week, even more. It just, no one ever really knew.
Did Bazaar tell you that he was leaving before his boat left the dock on April 30th?
Not on April 30th.
Hearsay.
Sorry, was that an objection?
Yes, Your Honor. I objected to hearsay. This is an out-of-court statement made to assert the truth of the matter.
What was the question again?
Did Bazaar tell you he was leaving before his boat left the dock on April 30th?
Do you have a response to her objection?
Your Honor, there is no statement. My witness is merely going to testify that they heard nothing from Bazaar before the boat left on April 30th.
Your Honor, response? Yeah. I would go on to say that that counsel is asking for an exact statement that has happened, and the question does call for hearsay. I'm objecting to his question, not the answer or the response.
There's actually an exception here, but I think it's only an evidentiary rule and not within your rules. So let's sustain the objection and maybe rephrase the question, but I in general do not have a problem with what you're getting at with the line of questioning, if that makes sense.
Yes, Your Honor. So in that case, did you hear anything from Bazaar on April 30th?
No.
Right. Do you happen to know who Sunday Leo is?
That's that detective that was on the stand earlier, right? I've been interviewed by her once before.
You've been interviewed. What did you tell them?
Well, I had told Detective Leo about the GPS pings from Barry's boat, but that was about it.
So Detective Leo didn't ask about anything else?
Nope.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Your Honor, I can simply rephrase the question if that will suffice.
Yes, let's try rephrasing the question. I'm not going to rule one way or the other on that because I don't. Go ahead and try and rephrase.
So outside of Barry's GPS pings, did you tell Detective Leo anything else during that interview?
No.
So since the lovely detective on this case didn't happen to ask you about the occurrences of April 30th, could you tell us the first thing that you noticed that night?
The first thing that I noticed at night was Sylvesterus calling out to me when he was going on his run. That was around 9:30 p.m.
Did you check your watch that night?
No, I was just assuming.
So, but regardless of the exact time, this was the first notable thing you saw that night?
Yes.
And was it normal for Sylvesterus to go out on these runs?
He went out on those runs all the time.
Was there any peculiar activity on the dirt road outside the marina after hearing Diardi on April 30th?
After hearing Diardi, I heard a car going towards the sanctuary. It was a sedan.
What types of cars would normally be driving along this dirt road?
It would be anybody coming to the marina or going to the sanctuary or leaving it.
So you saw a sedan driving toward the sanctuary. Who could that be? Or who at the sanctuary do you know that drives a sedan?
I only know one person that drives a sedan, and that's Serval Arata.
And you don't know anyone else at the sanctuary that drives a sedan?
As a matter of fact, everybody else at the sanctuary only drives trucks or SUVs.
So what happened after you saw that peculiar sedan?
After the sedan, I saw Barry's boat leave, and that was around 10 to 11 that night.
Did you see Bizarre on the boat as it left?
I didn't see anybody on the boat.
So operating under the possibility that it may not have been Bizarre, who else had you seen drive the Cat Ironic before?
Only two other people, and that was Sylvestris and Serval.
So you've seen both Sylvestris and Serval drive the boat?
Yes.
So did you do anything else that night?
I checked the GPS on Barry's boat.
Why do you feel the need to check the GPS signal?
Before Barry had left on April 30th, he was feeling mighty anxious about something. I'm not sure what.
Well, in that case, how many pings did you end up seeing?
I saw 2 pings.
Could you describe the direction in which the boat was going?
It was going west.
And you didn't happen to receive any more pings after those initial 2?
Not after the initial 2.
Why would that be? Why would you not receive any more GPS signals?
I'm assuming Barry probably turned it off. I mean, he doesn't like Big Brother watching him. Look, Big Brother could be watching right now.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
That Big Brother is watching right
Yes, ma'am.
I'm objecting to that, what she said about Barry Bizarre on the boat. That was speculation.
now. Okay. Response?
Your Honor, my client or my witness, Chaz Nehmeyer, is well versed with Barry Bizarre. They had to even convince them in order to even initiate or establish the GPS signal being on their boat in the first place. They have knowledge of how Bizarre feels about Big Brother.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
I would argue that this is still speculation, as this witness was not present and did not know Mr. Bizarre's mental state at the time and could not possibly know if he turned the GPS signal off.
I think that's
Response, Your Honor?
Yeah, if you can respond, yeah.
My client was, or my witness was very well aware that the GPS signal was no longer responding, as they only received 2 pings. They were well aware that the GPS was no longer working, and they suspect that it was turned off.
Okay. So I'm gonna sustain her objection because you've only got a couple of minutes left on your direct, but I'm going to sustain her objection because you haven't established the means by which the signal could be out, right? So she's not going to be able to guess which one it is since she didn't witness it, though you can ask a line of questioning if you wish as to how this signal may have gone out.
Okay, Your Honor. I'll move on in that case.
Moving on.
So moving on. So how far from the marina was the last ping that you saw?
3 ocean miles.
And how far from the marina was the open ocean?
4.
So doing some quick math, the last ping was 1 nautical mile away from the open ocean.
Yes, sir. Great quick math.
So I suppose this was around where you talked to our lovely detective about the pings.
Yes.
Did you happen to save that data?
I did not. She wasn't very interested, so I just let it go.
So Detective Leo didn't seem interested in the physical data within 60 days after first talking to you?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation. There has been no foundation that has been laid that she would know the mental state of the detective at this time.
Your Honor, response, Your Honor.
Specific question again? Say it again.
So within 60 days after first talking to Detective Leo, they didn't show any interest in the physical data of the GPS signals within the first 60 days, or the 60 days preceding.
I'm going to overrule it because I think what he's getting at is not a feeling of interest, but an actual action demonstrating interest in procuring that data. Though I think the way that it's been phrased creates a confusion as to what you're referring to. So restate your question.
So when did you end up deleting the data?
It deleted after 60 days.
So within 60 days, Detective Leo didn't approach you at all wanting the physical data?
No.
So did you know about the typhoon turning east of Siegfried Island?
No, nobody knew about that.
Did the Bazaar have any experience with the ability to weather a typhoon?
No.
And then do you have anything else you would like to state for the record?
I'd like to state a conversation I had with Arata around April 23rd.
And how did this, no further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Yeah, and I see we have Team B's timekeeper, but I did not see Team C's timekeeper.
I believe our timekeeper may have had technical issues or been disconnected.
She got kicked out of the meeting. Okay. So Team C, no one let us know that she got kicked out. I just noticed just a couple of minutes ago that she wasn't keeping up. Do you have any sort of complaint or objection? Because this is kind of prejudicial to you that you don't have a timekeeper, or do you agree with B's timekeeping and agree to abide by what they think the time is right now? Do you need another couple of seconds, or are we okay to move forward?
We're okay to move forward. I have no objection to B's timekeeping.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Judge, to interrupt. There is a person in the waiting room with the name Kimmy Brown. Would that be the timekeeper?
Correct.
Okay, I'll admit that person. We didn't know who they were, so we couldn't admit them. I'll admit that person for the remaining portion of the round.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll give the timekeeper, we just have the closing statements. I'm gonna have to, I think there's something I'm supposed to read before we.
Your Honor, I still have my cross.
Oh, what am I talking about? I got all distracted. Okay, so let's for your cross, let's give the Team C's timekeeper just a second to get into the room and to confer with the other timekeeper on how much time there is, because they haven't been tracking it for at least 5-10 minutes now. So
yes,
we'll go with what Team B has for everybody, since there was no objection from Team C. But if the timekeeper can just put in the chat that they're ready to proceed with taking time, we'll just wait on them to let us know that, and then we'll go for your cross-examination. Sorry, I got so distracted by that direct. It was just very entertaining. So I forgot we hadn't done cross yet. Thank you for reminding me. I apologize for that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Timekeeper C is ready to proceed. No apologies necessary, dear. All right, you may continue on with your cross.
Good afternoon, Ms. Demir. I'd like to ask you some questions today to clarify your testimony.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about April 30th, the day that Barry Bazaar disappeared. You testified on direct that the defendant called out to you at 9:30 p.m., correct?
Around that time, yes, ma'am.
But you did not actually see the defendant.
No, ma'am.
And you cannot account for his whereabouts after that.
No, ma'am.
And then you testified that you saw a car around 9:45 p.m., correct?
Yes, ma'am.
But you did not look at your watch.
No, ma'am.
So you can't be sure of the time.
I was just being approximate around that time range.
But redirecting you back to my question, you cannot be sure of the time.
You're correct.
And you believe that this car was Miss Arata's car.
Yes, ma'am.
But it was dark outside.
Yes, ma'am.
And you did not actually see Miss Arata in the car.
No.
So you cannot be sure it was Miss Arata's car going into the sanctuary.
Correct.
Now, let's talk a little bit about Barry Bazaar's boat. You've worked at the marina for 10 years, correct?
Yes.
So you've gotten to know Mr. Bizarre and his boat pretty well.
Yes, ma'am.
And you saw Mr. Bizarre's boat leave the marina between 10 and 11 p.m., correct?
Correct.
But you don't know the exact time.
No, ma'am.
And it's true that when Mr. Bizarre went out, he would tell you, correct?
Correct.
But Mr. Bizarre did not speak to you that night.
No, ma'am.
And that was unusual for Mr. Bizarre.
Yes.
And you did not actually see who took out Mr. Bizarre's boat.
No.
And as you testified on direct, the defendant, to your knowledge, knows how to drive Mr. Bizarre's boat, correct?
And so does others.
But that's a yes to my question. The defendant knows how to drive Mr. Bizarre's boat, to your knowledge.
Yes, to my knowledge.
So the defendant could have taken out the boat that night.
That is possible.
And after the boat left, you decided to check its GPS signal.
Yes.
And the GPS ping showed that Barry's boat was still in the bay,
Correct.
just 3 miles out.
Yes.
And as you testified on direct, the time of the last ping from Mr. Bizarre's boat was 11:10 p.m., correct? And there were no more pings after 11:10 p.m.
Correct.
And you think someone turned off the GPS, correct?
Objection calls for speculation.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
I'm simply asking the witness what she thinks. She can testify to based off a rationally based perception, and I have laid the foundation that she would know the basic goings on in the boat. Also, she testified on direct that she thought that somebody turned off the GPS.
Wait, didn't you have an objection when we were on a direct examination as far as to her speculating what was going on in the boat?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, then I'm going to sustain his objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, you don't know the path the boat took after that time.
Correct.
And you don't know if the boat ran into the typhoon, correct?
Correct.
And you don't know that Mr. Bizarre's boat is lost at sea.
Correct.
Now, you believe that if you were on that boat, you would be able to swim back to shore, correct?
Correct.
So,
Objection calls for speculation.
response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
This is not speculation because I'm simply asking her to testify to what she thinks that she could do. She can testify to what she can do. And this is rationally based perception.
What specifically was your question again? The way you phrased it?
I said, now you believe that if you were on that boat, you would be able to swim back to shore.
I'm sustaining his objection. There's a better way to say that. So why don't you rephrase it?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, if you were on, so you believe, so you're in pretty good shape, correct?
I'd say so, I guess.
And this is because you've been a Marine for about 10 years, correct?
Correct.
So you think, so if you were on that boat, you could swim back to shore, correct?
That is possible. Correct.
And you know that the defendant runs regularly, correct?
Correct.
In fact, she does regular 10-mile runs.
Correct.
And you know that she's in pretty good shape, correct?
Correct.
And that's why you think that the defendant might be able to swim from where Barry's boat was back to shore.
Objection calls for speculation.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
I have laid the foundation that she would be able to know the distance that it would take, the physical taxing that it would take, and she knows that the defendant is in good shape. So I have laid the foundation that she would be able to testify to a rationally based perception if she thinks that the defendant could or not swim that distance.
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
The skills of running 10 miles and swimming 3 miles are very different. Running is a very different activity than swimming is. And
Response, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
This in itself does not matter. It is whether or not they are in shape enough. Physical exercise means that you are in shape. If you are in shape enough to run 10 miles, she can testify to her own rationally based perception if she thinks that if he could swim those 3 miles, because she knows that she can swim them, as she has testified earlier. And so she would be able to know the physical taxation level, and she would be able to speak to her personally rationally based perception if she thinks that the defendant might be able to swim that distance.
response, Your Honor.
She doesn't have a phobia of water.
Your Honor, I am simply asking her if she thinks, like I am asking her to testify to a rationally based perception.
I get what you're saying, but I agree with defense counsel's position that running and swimming are two different physical activities. And while we may be able to establish the predicate foundation for how far the witness can swim based on their physical activity, we can't even present a comparative here because we don't have any sort of comparative basis. You've established that the defendant is physically fit and potentially capable of physically doing this, but I don't think you've created the predicate foundation that this particular witness has seen anything that would allow them to make that leap, that they could have made that swim based on their own personal ability to swim as a Marine from the boat back to the shore. So I get what you're trying to get at, but I'm inclined to side with the defense on this one, that the line of questioning is more speculative and prejudicial than probative. So I'm sustaining the objection, and let's try and get at it a different way.
Yes, Your Honor. And you were in court today for Ms. Arata's testimony, correct?
Witness, are you having problems with sound? Did you hear?
I heard her. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, there we go.
Correct.
Okay. And you heard her say that she saw the defendant dripping wet at midnight, correct?
Correct.
And this is only about 1 hour after the last ping from Mr. Bizarre's boat.
Correct.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Do you have redirect?
The defense counsel has no time for redirect and would like to request permission for the witness to step down.
Yes, the witness may step down. All right. We will now hear closing arguments from each party. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view. Also, since all witnesses have completed their testimony, you can complete the witness, well, that's for me, that we can complete the witness portion of our ballot. All right, you may proceed.
Your Honor, before I begin, I would request that I be able to have up to 1 minute for a rebuttal.
You're reserving your time?
Yes.
You may reserve your time.
May it please the court, Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. On April the 30th, 2020, the eccentric owner of the Big Cat Sanctuary, Mr. Barry Bizarre, mysteriously disappeared. However, prior to his disappearance, the defendant had gotten into several loud arguments with Barry Bizarre. As a result, the defendant was afraid that Barry would fire her and kick her out of the well. Now, she planned Barry's murder, being afraid of this, using the weapon that was right in front of her, the white cat. The defendant knew that a cat had attacked Barry before, and on April the 30th, when she was alone with Barry, she locked Barry in a cage with White Cat. She had also purposefully starved the white cat in the days leading up so that the white cat would have been extremely hungry. Now, after the white cat attacked and killed Barry, the defendant sailed out of the marina with the body. And after 3 miles, she left the boat to continue on its own path and swam to shore. Unbelievable? Well, sometimes the truth can be stranger than fiction. Members of the jury, my name is Claire Baxter, and I represent the state of Texoma along with my co-counsel, Liam Blank and Isabel St. John. Now, as the prosecution, we gladly bear the burden of proof in today's case. This means that we have to prove to you that Sylvester Stiardi either intentionally or knowingly caused the death of Barry Bizarre. Now, this does not mean that we have to prove this to you beyond a reasonable doubt. And this does not mean that we must prove this to you beyond all doubt. It simply means that if you find the proof we have presented here today to be that of such a convincing character that any reasonable person would not hesitate to rely on it, then you must find Sylvester Stiardi guilty of murder. This is not a difficult standard. Prosecutors across America meet this burden every single day. Now, let's review the facts. First, the defendant had the motive to kill Barry Bizarre. As you heard Mr. Rada testify today, that before Barry disappeared, she had heard several loud arguments between the defendant and Barry. She even heard Barry threaten to cut the defendant out of the will. After these arguments, the defendant was afraid that Barry would fire her as well. As she testified, she has thousands of dollars in gambling debt. Now, Ms. Jacobidis testified that the defendant had made several critical comments about her boss. Second, the defendant had the means to kill Barry Bizarre. The defendant had the perfect weapon sitting right in front of her, the white cat. And as Ms. Arata testified, Mr. Bizarre had already been attacked by a cat before. These cats are dangerous, wild animals, as evidenced by the snow leopard attack at the Texoma Zoo. The defendant herself testified that the white cat had only been fed once in a span of 4 whole days, and she was in fact the one responsible for feeding the cats. Now, Charles Namir also testified that the defendant in fact knew how to drive Barry Bizarre's boat. Lastly, the defendant had the physical ability to run 10 miles a day and was a very, very fit person. Third, the defendant had the opportunity. Now, on the night of April the 30th, Giardi knew that everybody at the sanctuary would be gone. Why? Mr. Arata testified that the defendant purposefully sent off all the employees on what she had described as crazy trips that evening. Ms. Manul testified that she went to a meat plant that was 3 hours away, one way from the sanctuary. Mr. Arata testified that she went to the Wiesbaum store that was supposed to go to the Wiesbaum store that was an hour and a half away from the sanctuary, even though there was one significantly closer. Now, Serval Arata testified that the entire film crew went out on each Thursday, and April 30th, in fact, was a Thursday. So, on April the 30th, the defendant made sure that no one was around to witness her crime. The defense has tried to distract you by claiming that without a body, there is not a crime. However, members of the jury, there was no body because the defendant did everything she could to make sure it could not be found. She hoped that without a body, there would be no conviction. Do not fall into the same trap that Barry Bizarre did. We are confident that after reviewing the evidence presented in today's case, you will find the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you.
Defense, you may proceed with closing.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I am Jacob Mitchell, and I stand here on the side of Silvestris Giardi. Over the course of this trial, we have watched the prosecution attempt to build the house that is their case against Giardi with evidence made of straw. The prosecution is building a house of straw with the expectation for it to stand on its own. Certainly didn't work for the little pigs. The prosecution in this case has been tasked with proving beyond any reasonable doubt that my client Silvestris Giardi was responsible for intentionally or knowingly killing Barry Bizarre without proper justification. It is evident throughout the presentation of the prosecution's case, the prosecution provides no more evidence to support the idea that my client is responsible for the death of Barry Bizarre as Serval Arata, Pardalis Jacobidis, Typhoon Judy, or Bob. Silvestris Giardi came to the stand today to testify of the paternal bond that she maintained with Barry Bizarre. She discussed the course of her actions on April 30th and blew away the evidence the prosecution attempts to construct their measly house with. Kip Manul came to the stand to testify against that Arata was the individual who originally purchased the smoke detectors, yet purchased the incorrect batteries for the very smoke detectors they bought before. Manul also provides the reality of Silvestris Giardi and Barry Bizarre's relationship, reiterating that paternal bond and friendship between the two individuals. Lastly, Chaz Nehmeyer, commonly known as Marine, testified to the usage and lack of presence of an EPIRB on Bizarre's boat. Marine discussed the course of April 30th events, first the film crew leaving, then Giardi going for a run, and lastly, and then Arota returning in their sedan to the sanctuary, allegedly, and lastly, Bazar's boat leaving the dock. Regardless of the exact time, that is the occurrence of the events that Chaz Nehmeyer witnessed. Ladies and gentlemen, as this case comes to a close, I want you to remember that in order for my client, Silvestris Diardi, to be proven guilty of murder, the prosecution must prove beyond any reasonable doubt that my client is the perpetrator. They claim that there is not reason to believe beyond any possible doubt, and that's absolutely true. But they refuse to address any other possibilities. They approach this case with an extremely narrow-minded and cherry-picking mindset. The prosecution has attempted to sway you with claims that my client committed arson and removed batteries from the fire alarm. But the reason Diardi's fingerprints are on the fire alarm was due to their occupation. They changed the batteries of that fire alarm. That was a part of their job at the sanctuary. And those fingerprints could have been there from up to 40 days prior. The prosecution continues to attempt to sway you with Detective Leo's testimony and how that they're a lead detective, yet they have no experience with arson. Yet they go through and interview an arson case, and interview Pardalis Jacobidis and Serval Arota, the two individuals that suspect Silvestris Diardi without even knowing the fire was set intentionally. The detective conducted a very biased investigation, first interviewing the very people that suspected Silvestris Diardi, and before interviewing anyone else, proceeded into investigations of the material at the crime scene. The prosecution throughout this case has failed to consider other possibilities. Even simple questions are enough to huff and puff enough gusto to blow apart the straw house the prosecution claims is enough to condemn a woman to life in prison. Where is the body of Barry Bazar? Is there any proof pertaining to the body of Barry Bazar that could condemn Silvestris Diardi? Kip Manul certainly thinks not. And why would Silvestris Diardi kill a man that she was so close to, that gave her a life after prison? And why kill Barry Bazar if she and others very well knew the outcome if Bazar dies to the hands of Silvestris Diardi? I'm sure that you will find my client, Silvestris Diardi, not guilty on all charges thanks to the evidence and testimony provided today. Don't allow justice. Thank you, Your Honor.
Rebuttal, Your Honor.
Yes, you reserved your time. Go ahead.
Members of the jury, you must ask yourself 3 questions. 1, who was the only one who knew what the white cat was capable of? 2, who was the only one with something to gain? And 3, who was the only one? Has time expired, Your Honor?
No, I think that was for, is it? You reserved time.
Yes, Your Honor, I had 20 seconds remaining.
Oh, okay. Just do one last sentence. I think we're just very confused. Just do one last sentence for us real quick and wrap it up.
The answer to these questions is only Silvestris Diardi, which is why you must find Silvestris Diardi guilty of murder. Thank you.
There we go. All right, thank you. Sorry, guys. I think considering how different the formatting is here, doing this virtually, this went wonderfully smoothly, much better than I could have anticipated, and you all did such a wonderful job. I wish I could ask for applause, but we don't have a gallery like we usually do. So, does the prosecution allege any rules violations?
No, Your Honor.
And does the defense allege any rules violations?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. So evaluators should please complete their electronic ballots, save it to the computer and email it to mgarcia@dallasbar.org. Before we do all of that, one of the things that was not in my script, I was reminded to do so that because the judges aren't capable of looking at all of you at the same time like we usually are, if the teams could go ahead and we'll do our intros again to remind, now that they've had a time to see all of you, to remind them who you are. So we'll start with the prosecution. If you can go through and say your name and what you did during the case so the judges can see that. That'll be really helpful. And then we'll have the defense go through their team.
Yes, Your Honor. Once again, my name is Claire Baxter and I represent the state of Texoma.
My name is Isabel St. John and I represent the state of Texoma.
My name is Liam Blank and I represent the state of Texoma.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Artaza and I portrayed Serval Arata.
Good afternoon. My name is Avery Avila Dixon and I portrayed Pardalis Jacobidis.
Good afternoon. My name is Abby Anderson and I portrayed Sandaleo.
Okay. Defense?
Good afternoon. My name is Jacob Mitchell and I represented Sylvestris Diardi.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Hazelhorst and I represented the defendant Sylvestris Diardi today.
Good afternoon. My name is Manya Iyer and I represented the defendant Sylvestris Diardi.
Good afternoon. My name is Sanvi Halpet and I portrayed Sylvestris Diardi.
My name is Mia Eli and I portrayed Kid Manuel.
My name is Abby Terry and I portrayed Chase Nehmeyer.
Okay. All right. So let me check and make sure that's all we need. All right. So if the judges can stay in the meeting so we can just check base with our host before we depart, that would be good. But as far as for the team participants, thank you so much, guys. You did an absolutely wonderful job. I know I'll have some positive feedback for you guys with my ballot, even though I don't know if my ballot itself will count, but I will try and send some notes for you guys to use in further competitions. And we really appreciate you being here, and you can go ahead and log out of
Don't leave yet, participants. Just sorry, Judge. That's a last minute change on my part. Because this round has run a little bit beyond our original scheduling, we are going to begin round 3 at 3 o'clock. We are also going to begin awards and announcements at 5:15. I apologize for those changes, but I appreciate everybody's flexibility. And what a great round. Thanks for letting us watch.
Okay, now they can leave.
Yes, and judges, please hang out a minute.
Okay, thank you guys. Go ahead and sign out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Whew.
Oh my God.
Let me